So, alright.
You need to sleep, Bob.
We are live.
Yeah, he's asleep, yeah, right.
All right.
We're having fun here, I wonder where everybody else is.
They all might be
They'll
on
let
the
us
meeting.
in, that we're live.
We're live. So we're all set. We'll call the meeting to order. It's Tuesday, December 20, last meeting before the holidays and end of year. So we have our first item. This is a resolution. This is on Goodsite, 63 Seven Bridges and 4 Winthrop Road. This was an application for a tree removal permit. So we had a public hearing last time around. We closed that public hearing. We asked staff to put together a resolution based on the conversations that we had there. I think the legal teams worked on this and came up with some language that made some good sense that I think was acceptable to both sides. So Brad, are you okay with the resolution as it's currently drawn up at this point?
Sure, Mr. Chairman.
All set, okay. I hope the applicant is also at this point, so we're set. Any questions or thoughts on the resolution as it's been presented and drawn up? Okay. If not, is there a motion to adopt the resolution as drawn?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None, so the resolution's all set. Much earlier night than the last time.
How long is the next one gonna go?
Well, the next what, an application?
Yeah.
You wanna just practice or something?
Was this the whole meeting?
No, we're,
I'm done. Okay. Thank you guys.
yep, thank you. Happy holidays.
Alright, thank you.
Happy
See you, Dennis.
Happy holidays.
Okay, our next item is an informal appearance continuing before the board. This is the Midas Main Street, Lot Corp. 90 Inningwood Road, an application for a site development plan, steep slopes and tree removal permit. So it might be helpful, Jennifer, are you there? I see you.
Yes,
Okay,
I am here. I'm sorry, I'm in the car. I'll be home shortly, but I am here.
okay, well, drive carefully.
Thank you. The wonders of technology these days.
I guess. Do you wanna just bring us up to date on our thoughts on the application at this point?
Yeah, I'll just share that I did receive the title report, the title search that was submitted by the applicant. What I had requested, and what I think the board requested, was a title opinion, so not just a recitation of, the issues that are applicable to the search property, but an opinion from the title company as to the current owner. It's based on the title search, it looks like the current owner is, to the county castle.
who? I'm sorry,
But it would be
I
good
missed
to have
It looks like it's the state of New York.
Okay.
the state of New York, right, not the town of Newcastle.
Yeah.
But it would be good to have an opinion of the title company, confirming that, rather than just reciting the facts.
Right, and I think also Jennifer, we also saw that on the Westchester GIS maps that it looked as though that those parcels were also owned by the state of New York.
Yeah, Westchester County GIS does indicate that those parcels that make up Inningwood Road in that location are owned by the state of New York. So all signs are pointing towards that ownership. It would be good for the record to have an opinion of the title company confirming that. And I think that it's, I think this is what you're getting at next. I think it's important before the planning board move forward with really opining on, alternative designs to understand what the state will or will not accept as far as improvements within that right of way. So we know the parameters within which that we're working.
Yeah, we were hoping, frankly, at least I was hoping that the property would be found to be owned by the town and then we could work with the town and work out the arrangements. But as I understand it, some of the property that the applicant proposes to cross is as much as 90 or 70 feet depending upon the crossing, so it's not inconsequential. I don't think it's necessarily a slam dunk that the state will just go along with whatever is being proposed here. And then we also find that we have stormwater, at least part of the stormwater, I think, some of the utilities are proposed to be within the state property. That's gotta be cleared. it's you know, we've been asking for this for a long time, this is the reason. And I fear that if we frankly move forward and we don't wanna waste the applicant's time and money, at this point, I think it's really incumbent upon the applicant to verify and clearly show who owns the property. If it is New York State, find that. And then you know, New York State's gonna they're gonna be looking at this and they're gonna have something to say, yay, nay, or in between. And I think it's kind of crazy for us to move forward when there's so much impact on so much state property here. Believe it or not, apparently there's a notch of this property that actually does front on Somerstown Road, Route 100 down toward the bottom. Probably that was set up by the state when they first carved away some property to build the road. You know, there might be some egress there. The whole thing is kind of crazy at this point because we're going on certain suppositions, I think I personally just think it's not a good use of our time at this point until we have information from the state. Bob Cioli's note articulates a couple of things that they would absolutely have to be obtained from the state in terms of permits, easements, et cetera. I really think it would be in everyone's best interest if the applicant pursues that with the state once they confirm, in fact, that this is state property. And that it's a state, and I'm not, who knows what department you have to deal with. The DOT, I know Bob mentions in his memo that it's a DOT. I suppose that's who it is, but who knows if it, I would trust it's not a parkland setback or something like this. But there's information here that really needs to have been provided a long time ago, and we've been asking for it for, I mean, literally months. And we still don't really have it. We have a supposition, but we really need hard facts. And it seems to me that we really need to get the input from the state in terms of what they wanna see or what they're going to permit before we do a whole lot more on this.
So can I ask a question about that? I agree with everything you're saying, but the question that I think then presents itself is what, because there is an alternative study here for an alternative driveway access to the property. And so if in the eventuality that we believe that we need to hear from the state first, what does the applicant take to the state for their review? There is this complete set of, or not complete, but this set of drawings which pretty much describes the impact of the state right away. And then there is essentially a sketch plan, even though it's on a computer, essentially a sketch plan that presents an alternative. And what does the applicant do in this case?
I would suggest that the applicant present both proposals, and I've had some conversations behind the scene on this. What the applicant hasn't done at this point is to bring any of this to the finish line, even in terms of the proposals. When you're doing this comparison, what I think would be very helpful for the state, and I think for also us, is when you lay out these proposals, now we may look at them and tweak them, et cetera, but at some point, they should be able to tell what's the delta in terms of steep slopes between the two proposals? What's the delta on these sight lines? Which is better, which is worse? Which is better in terms of slope? Which is better in terms of trees? What are the impacts? And yet that hasn't been quantified to where you can sit there and say, you know, on a quantification basis, you know, one is better than the other, one can be better, one is better. So I would suggest that that would be something that the applicant ought to do for fear that if they look at just the proposed, the preferred application, and for some reason if the state says, no, we don't like that, turn it down, then you know, we have nothing to go with and they have to start over again.
Also, just a question, are they gonna need a permanent easement over the state's property?
Oh, yeah, they'll need some sort of easement.
So that, to me, in and of itself, is almost sort of precedes the design question,
Yes.
right? It's just, there's sort of a threshold question about whether the state even is willing to entertain.
Correct.
I understand what you're
Right.
saying, but in order for the state, I would think to come
You have to show them something.
Yeah, cause they gotta know what the easement's for.
100
and how
I
it
completely
is,
agree.
and where it is and what's involved and
Yeah.
the impacts and so on.
The only reason I
So you
raise
need
it-
a design for that.
Yes, the only reason I raise it is just to further agree with Bob that we have no idea what the state's gonna say, and so for us to, I agree that I think what you're suggesting is we sort of table this until the state gets involved.
I'm suggesting that, well, okay, so I'm not, maybe we ought to reconsider that because it seems to me that we, if we take the state, put them aside, right, for a moment.
Mhm.
We have yet to come to, I think, any conclusions about where the driveway cut
Right, we've
should
been
be.
back and forth on this for a long time.
Right, and so as a consequence, if we step back and the applicant goes to the state, right? And gets their review about what they are willing or not willing to do, he still has to come back to us for our conclusion. And we may not agree with the state. I mean, it seems to me that, if the state says no, the state says no. But if the state says yes, you can put it here,
But, right.
but we prefer it over here, the
Right.
applicant is like, handcuffed
So it's a
again.
chicken and egg situation a little bit. What's
I'm not sure it's a chicken and egg situation so much as it is if this alternative gets developed to the point where there's enough information for our purposes to come to some judgment about which we prefer,
sure.
then there's material to go to the state and let them weigh in. I mean, that's another way to do it.
Yeah,
And I think to a certain extent, Bob's memo does a lot of the work for the applicant and is summarizing in some areas what, at least from his standpoint, without actually taking an absolute, position on this and saying this is the preferred proposal. But he's articulated, he's compared the sightlines and some of the problems with the sightlines and the alternative. This whole thing with an alternative driveway, even if this is the preferred one, what are we going to do with this driveway? What are we going to do in terms of servicing the septics and pumping up there in the future? Certainly, where are the tanks going to be put so that they can be accessed from, I guess, the driveway or whatever. So all those kinds of things need to be thought of. I understand what you're saying, Tom, but I think to a certain extent, I don't know if we really should be planning that for the applicant. I think that Bob has given them an awful lot of information that he's worked on his own and provided that in his memo saying, look, this is what the slope is, this is what our rule is on slope. I think he thinks that the cut here would be a little bit difficult for sightlines, this one down here lower because the rock has to be cut even further. So, I mean.
Well, the question, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but it seems to me the question is, it's the applicant's initiative to take this to the state, right? It's also the applicant's choice what to take to the state. And the applicant may not agree with the alternatives reviewed by the state. And the applicant comes back with a state response to the original proposal, and we decide that we don't like that, we
Right.
prefer the other proposal.
So, I mean, that would be something
it's-
that the applicant would do at their risk. I guess I would urge the applicant to give both proposals full ride and full attention, as they've done here to a certain degree. I think it's a bona fide attempt. I mean, we've seen a lot of straw dogs over the years, and I think the applicant should be applauded for what they've really done here.
So I agree that both options ought to get a view by the
Yep.
state.
Exactly.
And my only question is this option developed, is this option developed enough for our purposes? Maybe it doesn't have to be for our purposes, but for the state purposes to understand what this implies and entails.
I
And that
suspect it hasn't been, because obviously stormwater hasn't been done, I don't think, for that proposal to the degree of the other. My personal opinion is I was reading through Bob's memo and I see that, we're at 16.7%, the max is 16%. It seems probably in some way, somewhere, that can be tweaked to get it within the 16.
Yeah.
Without
without any
horrible
penalty.
difficulty.
None, no difficulty.
And so I don't know, I mean, I think the sightlines are really important on this road for whichever proposal, works out.
So, I'm just trying to avoid cause we know what it's like to deal with the state, right?
I'm curious to know what that is, like what is that process? And
It's
can we-
it's a brutal, can be brutal and long and not always had clarity attached to it.
Yes, that's a very good way of putting it.
So I hesitant to end up in a situation where the applicant is put in front of the state in a way that creates more confusion and noise in the conversation with them. I think clarity would be the best thing to do in that case. And so to me, clarity would be go to them once, go to them with what you want to do, right?
Speed.
And go from there. And if we think, if we want to direct the applicant to the alternative proposal, because in our judgment, that is the best site plan for what our responsibilities entail, then we should tell them now, I think. And to help sort of facilitate the process of clarity as they go through to the state, instead of having them come back and then say, oh, well, we don't want that.
So I see both sides to it, and I have very little experience with the state. And so I defer to you both to to decide. I have no problem continuing the discussion now. I don't think it's a waste of time. And maybe this is a horrible, maybe this is a horrible suggestion, but I would be curious, I'm not saying that we have to weigh it necessarily, but I'd be curious if the applicant has a preference, if we spend more time on the application here or just tell them to go to the state and figure it out and then come back to us. You don't have to take
Right.
their,
Or give them some input as to this, and this should be looked into. And either they come back and show it to us or go directly to the state, but at least we've given them all the input so that they have the ability to build it to the full
Yeah.
extent before.
Yeah, and I think maybe Bob, you can weigh in on this, but I
Yeah,
think Bob has
Bob.
given us a lot of that input. I mean, I think he probably has his druthers. I think the applicant has indicated that the initial proposal is their preferred proposal.
That's correct, yeah, because even the testing, we tested the entire site and we have very, the areas of showing stormwater in the area of the septic, we can't really deviate from that. And in order to get up the hill with that alternative, it causes us to lose most of that area.
Which area, the septic you're saying?
Yeah, the original stormwater areas where we show our design stormwater on the preferred layout, the original layout, a lot of that driveway encroaches onto those areas.
Oh, okay, I didn't follow that, but if you say so, I'm sure that's the case.
Now, Bob, if you'd like, I can go over just those two areas where I looked at two specific items for the alternate driveway. Thank you, Chairman. I mean, basically, I looked at it under AD one and AD two under alternate driveway comments, and what I did was I just did a quick down and dirty analysis on the two things I always look at, which is the deciding factors on whether the driveway is gonna be good or not. AD one, the average driveway grade is about 14.2%. Now, really, all I did was you get the elevation, you get the pavement, now everything was dry, you get the elevation of the garage slab, and you divide it out. Obviously, it's simple mathematics, and it's about maximum driveway grade is 16.7, and the average is 14.2. However, that doesn't take into account all the other items you need to put in to meet the code. So the maximum driveway grade is about 16.7. To Bob's point before, could you tweak it to get it down to 16? Yes. Do I, me as a town engineer, would I like to see it 16? We can get it down to something as lower as the preferred. I'd like to see it less than that, like 14 ideally. So those are my comments for AD1. And then on the preferred driveway, again, you can see the average grade is 9.3. It's much less. And then you can see we actually have the pavement grade, which is the actual driveway grade the car would be driving on. It's about 14%. To me, that's a pretty significant decrease. So the preferred driveway in that, I would think wins. On AD2, I looked at the sight lines and the impacts and the amount of cut to the rock. For the alternate driveway, the maximum distance would basically, where you're gonna measure in from the edge of the road, which is anywhere back to where the sideline distance is at its apex, its most, is about 40 feet. Now, the problem you have with the alternate driveway is that elevation that comes out is down the road. It's at an elevation about 402, 403. But you're looking up the hill because you need the 395 for the sideline. So when you're looking up that hill, you're looking at rock that's at elevations 450, 460, 465. That's a lot of rock elevation to pick up, and you can't because it's just a low elevation for the driveway coming out on the road. So you're looking at a rock cut of about 24 feet. That's quite a bit of rock to cut. On the preferred driveway, where the driveway comes out at a much higher elevation on the road, you're looking up the sideline 395, which is required based on the study they did by Colliers Engineering. The distance in from the edge of the pavement to where the sideline is 30 feet, so it's a 10-foot less. But the maximum rock cut is only 10 feet. So, in those two instances, based on the driveway grade, maximum grade, sideline, rock removal, sideline distance, the preferred driveway wins out in these two instances. Now, from an environmental standpoint, they didn't quantify the rock, they didn't quantify the trees to be removed, they didn't quantify the steep slopes, which is always an environmental issue which everyone looks at and balances these things. I did not look at that. I looked at these two specific things just to give the applicant and the planning board just some general idea of which one might be more favorable based on those two criteria.
There's some alternate site for tree removal, at least there seems to be a plan.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
Tell us, compare, put it, put it in a
So-
chart.
Table.
So, Bob, thank you for that. I guess in the alternate, it has not yet been developed enough so that we have a good read on things like sightlines and the extent to which you have to do the cut along the roadway. And
Yeah, of course, they didn't do the same analysis they did on the preferred driveway with the sideline and the actual cut. I did it based on the information I know that we need for the sidelines, which is about 395, the exact gradient
right.
coming out, and I wrote it, it was pretty much all consistent. So you can assume within reason that the sidelines are gonna be the same there as they are where the preferred layout is, which is about 395 feet looking left when you're coming out of the driveway.
So, I guess the question is, if you look at, and what's also not developed in the alternative is, in our work on the original driveway, we had asked for some retaining walls to be put in order to mitigate for some of the steep cuts that would be done there. None of that has been looked at in the alternative as options to sort of mitigate for the steep cuts there, so we don't have an apples to apples comparison.
That is correct,
yet.
that is correct.
And
At
that's
the Bob's point, they didn't do an analysis for the tree removal, and they did not do the steep slopes analysis as well on the alternative.
So where do we go from here? So Bob, with respect to the working with the state on this, do you have some intuition about, or some recommendation about how they ought to be approached with one scheme or two schemes?
I would recommend they reach out to Andros. Every project I do with Town of Newcastle, no matter on the magnitude, the extent, the first thing they really have to do is get a New York State highway work permit. And the person that I reach out to all the time is Ann Aurelius. She's a PE, she's a permit engineer with the state, up in Katona. She's the one to reach out to first because she's the one that's the liaison with the state, and she will send all of the plans to the different agencies up in Burnett Boulevard. They'll send it to the Geotech Division, they'll send it to the Drainage Division, they'll send it to the Traffic and Safety Division, and probably even the Real Estate Division to get easements. She is the main contact to start the ball rolling on this. That's what I would recommend. And I would also recommend that when they do deal with Andros, they keep me in the loop every inch of the way, so we kind of know what they need, what they're looking for, and what the status is on this project. We've done it in other projects. It seems to work out pretty good. I have a very good professional relationship with her. That's what I would recommend.
So in the case of this project, what would we send them? Would we send them?
I think what we have here, you know, they're gonna look at that. I mean, you know, I know when dealing with the state, they are very big on having, I don't wanna put a gouache to this, but I know they're very big on not having two curb cuts. You know, we have one driveway, one residence, they'd like to see one driveway curb cut because there are many things, you know, safety along those roads. I can't speak for them, but in my experience, that's kind of their mindset sometimes. I think the plans we have developed, there's a lot of information to give them to make a determination on what needs to be done. It shows all the improvements in the right of way, the stormwater, the curb cut, the landscape, the plantings, the stone line swale, the head wall, the piping. That's all gonna be looked at by the state. They're gonna scrutinize the stormwater report too, is they wanna make sure there's no more water coming off that side as well, so.
I just want to be clear, all that detail you just cited is in the preferred alternative. Would we be sending them the alternative 2 or DB or whatever we're calling it also for their consideration? That's my question.
We are not sending them anything, it's up to the applicant to send it to them.
Yeah, the applicant, yeah.
No,
Yeah, and I think they're gonna look at it, and, you know, they have my memo they can look at too. I did a quick data analysis, and the state's gonna look at this. Believe you me, they're not shy about asking what they need. If they need more information on that alternate driveway,
Okay.
they'll certainly ask for it, believe you me.
I just don't want it to get lost in the
Yeah,
stage
right.
and come back and we're hamstrung, right?
Well, there's one big advantage with the alternate proposal, and that is one cut.
Right, so I think,
And that's huge. I mean, you know, you can, you know, I understand sightlines, et cetera, but, you know, we said, I think one of the statements we made a long time ago was we understand the special need here and the special conditions, but for the most part, we never have two road cuts for, you know, a single residential development. We just don't, and I don't know what the state's going to read on this, but that certainly is one big advantage of the other, because they need this other cut to access the septic and the sewage and just to construct the building, as I understand it. So that's a tough one.
so I think Tom's point, which I'm coming around to slowly, you know, I'm slow, is a good one, and that the point I think is that if we're saying to the applicant, you need to go talk to the state, which clearly the applicant does need to do. If you're going with two options, they should be equally developed. They are two very different options. We have talked a lot about this project, trying to do what's best for the applicant, for the town, genuinely weighing all the positives and negatives of the proposals and the alternatives. But now, now realizing that it needs to go to the state, it just feels like sending allowing it to move forward with the two proposals as they stand. One of them is a little bit of a, I mean, we'll see what the state has to say, but one of them is a little bit of a straw man, as you were saying. Like this alternative proposal is not sufficiently thought out.
At least from what Bob's saying, that you have enough to get there, because they're gonna have a lot of input.
Yeah, and that's okay if they actually ask for that input, but I think to Tom's point, again, I think, by the way, as you do that comparative chart, I think as you go through trees and steep slopes and height and view and sightlines, et cetera, I mean, I think also, number of cuts, one, number of cuts, two. I mean, that's important on that chart too. Is it determinative? No, I don't think so, but it's certainly something that has to be balanced.
And
So
that's-
I would think,
It's getting closer, I mean,
Yes.
you can see the
Yep.
profiles, so it's really,
Yeah,
we can put a similar
I
chart.
really thought that the alternate driveway was going to be way out of whack, frankly, over the 16%. I thought it was, I was led to believe that it's really just a non-starter.
And
So when I saw a 16.7, I said, well, that's close enough, we can tweak it, and to Bob's point, I know he would prefer 14, but I bet there's a way you could get to 14.5, 15, with a couple of, curves, and working, I think, frankly, a little bit better with these slopes.
Well, you could get to 16% by just dropping the house a foot.
Correct. correct.
Or dropping the garage, you know,
Right.
instead of one step up in the house, two steps up in the house.
Yep, absolutely, correct,
So it's not a problem.
that's right.
I think.
Good point, that's a very good point, thanks.
So, all right, so here's what I'm a little concerned about is that if we actually have a preference, a strong preference for one scheme versus another, and we send both to the state for them to review, let's remember they're a supernumerary organization. They come back and they say, well, we prefer actually the one that you guys don't prefer because you gave us a choice. What position does that put us in with respect to how we manage the next step in the process, which is to tell the applicant, well, maybe the state likes it, but we don't like it. It's
Can I
sort
just
of-
say something really quick?
Sure,
Sure,
please.
Just this other access was really, like I said, originally meant just to get the machine in there, clean the rock up, restore it, never use it again. I mean, it doesn't help our position if we just remove it altogether.
What?
Yeah, the construction access that we have shown on our preferred layout.
No, I understand, but I don't understand the logic of that. That's all.
Well, because it seems to be creating, a big problem with two curb cuts, and really, like I said, the only reason we had that shown on our option was to get, machines up in there just to start the rock tripping and restore that entrance. I'm just wondering is if we completely get rid of that now we're dealing with one curb cut, does it help our preferred plan? Because we prefer the plan that's, we developed, the other plan we're not crazy about, we're showing another option, and the other thing that concerns me about that other plan is we're now entering on a curve of a road when people are coming down. So I just wanted to add that.
I see a curve on
see that.
either of these locations.
I actually see less of a curve on the
Yeah.
first option.
Yeah, there's a curve there, we've been there, so there's.
I live there.
Yeah, so it's a tough curve.
So if you're gonna, we agree that one driveway is better, and I think that where we may be heading is if you're gonna take one driveway out, it should probably be the original proposal. But with respect to coming to a conclusion that has the data points and the metrics that we always try and make sure we're being careful about, we don't yet have the information that, Bob has talked about is not, Bob Kirkwood and Bob Scioli have both said there's some more work to be done here for us to give a fair analysis of the alternative. In order, I think, the right thing to do is to find the right one to take to the state and not put them in a position of making a decision for us. Because their concerns are not entirely the same, nor do they embrace all of our concerns.
So the applicant prefers the first one,
Yeah.
is that what we're hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, the answer to the first question you posed, Tom, is if the state came back with something that, was not our preferred, I think it would still be incumbent upon us to try to figure out a way to accommodate the applicant and get it approved somehow, some way.
Because it's their choice.
It's gonna be tough, but as much as, I've looked at this alternative, and when we walked out there on the site, it was not just for the machinery, but my impression when I was walking out there was that was really a realistic alternative that presented some environmental savings. And I remain concerned with again, the quantification. I mean, with all these walls that are being developed along the western side of the property, along the preferred driveway, we would, we don't know what we'd have, but it's really substantial. So,
I have a question.
sure, Dick.
Yeah, Anthony, are you gonna put mirrors, where the driveway hits the road in your preferred option? Because if you had a mirror that could show you what's likely coming at you from uphill, I would think that would.
Dick, can I say one thing? The state does not allow mirrors. They do not allow mirrors. The
They
state
don't
will
allow them
not.
anymore?
Absolutely not. The town nor the state.
I don't think they ever did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do we need to send a list to where some of them still exist? Where they grandfathered?
I spoke to Andarellis all the time, people try to do it on just, building permits and the state's policy is, they do not allow mirrors anymore at all.
That's why the sidelines were cutting it so you could actually see and not have to rely on mirrors. Yeah, that's what that rock cut is.
Rock salt. Alright.
So the more we
That
talk
just
about it,
don't have
the more
enough
convinced I am that we should figure out what we, absent the state, we should determine what we think makes sense, what we would approve were the state not in question, and then we've sort of come this far. We asked for this alternative, Bob, you asked for this alternative, it's interesting, we should learn more about it, see if it is preferable for us, and then make a recommendation that that's what the applicant goes to the state with.
I guess we could ask the applicant to fill this out, right? And study this fully as they've done on the preferred. Then we have that information and then we could make a recommendation for one of the two as they go to the state. It's gonna take a little bit more time for the applicant.
I still don't know why we're sending two to the state. I mean, the applicant can send what they like, but
No,
it
we're,
seems, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Kanan. So if there is an application, a site plan, right, that we prefer, we ought to be promoting that site plan
Right.
as the submission for this application. And that would be the application that then goes forward not just to the state, but
Yep.
to the county and to everybody else.
No, I understand
Instead of
that.
having, these two alternatives.
I understand that, but I don't have enough, from my standpoint, I don't have enough information on this alternative, which I think is a realistic alternative.
I'm not suggesting we don't get it, I'm saying
Yeah.
we should get it.
And then, at that point, we would make
Yeah.
a determination, this is our preference, along with the
Before it
applicant.
goes to the state.
Exactly. If they wanna do that, if they wanna go through that process.
That's
Yeah,
up to
we all
them.
agree.
but
Exactly.
what-
I mean,
The
obviously,
application we wanna see, we may wanna see maybe an application with
Yep.
one curb cut, which is the alternate B.
exactly, exactly right.
Thank you.
So, I mean, I know it's imposing more time and work on the applicant, but the applicant can, I suppose, can go directly to the state and
Do what you want.
do what they want with the state, or go to the state and also come back to us in the meantime, and we can look at the alternative and flesh it out. And maybe during the course of a review by the state, they're not real fast on these, so I think there's time.
Slip the other
We
one in.
we could actually send them some information about a preference. I don't think this is gonna be a turnaround time where they're finished in a month or two.
I also don't think this necessarily adds more time for the applicant. If we were gonna ask for this anyway, then,
That's a good point, Eldon.
I don't think that we're being unnecessarily harsh on the applicant. This is something that we asked for this alternative. We were gonna work with it and ask more questions and ask for it to be better fleshed out anyway, I'm sure. And this might even speed the process along.
It just puts us into a jam, because like I mentioned, there's no area to really, treat stormwater.
With the
I don't,
option two. Option one has the thing. It sounds to me like there's too many impediments on the new one that was just proposed. And I would think it would speed things along if we just send one to the state
I don't,
and take a vote and see if we like the existing one well enough
maybe it's this one.
or not. If we like it well enough, then get the state looking at it, and they can come back and say, well, we don't like where the how much rock is left at the roadside, or things like that. We'll see what they come back with, and the applicant then can deal with that perhaps. And if not, it gets prolonged, if they can really fill out in the meantime while the first option that we like right now and goes forward, will they be able to use that time to fill out all the things we need on option two? So,
yeah, I mean, this is not my area, of course, this is up to Bob and the engineers, but I don't follow the statement how it's going to impact the stormwater, but
If you notice on the preferred plan, we have that stormwater treatment area that's up top.
Yep.
It's We're going right over that with that new driveway,
So
get up
move
there,
it,
just.
so move it, is that the only place on the site that those Coltech units can go?
I mean,
Yeah, we
Anthony,
Yeah,
just take other, there's no other deep test hole areas you can take to Tom's point to find another location. And that's a pretty good sized site.
Yeah,
Yeah, and all of our data pretty much shows anywhere we can drain to, we have those areas shown now. And everything else is also pretty steep.
Well, I mean, to demonstrate to
Would
the
it be
board
helpful
that
for
it's
you
not
to put a map
feasible,
up, Anthony,
can I
show
say
the
something?
terrain?
Yeah.
I mean, I would recommend you show where you took the deeps, and if the good, best deeps and perfs are right where the new driveway is, that would demonstrate to the board that maybe it's not a good spot. But if you don't show that, they're not gonna know regardless.
yeah, we,
Yeah, this is the area we have, this area over here, and then here's the septic.
Yeah, but you're gonna have, if the alternate B is preferred, then you're gonna have this whole area that's gonna be undisturbed and available, and that's good soil out there. We walked it. I mean, it's gonna be all disturbed with this plan, but there's probably some area in that area that you can, take care of stormwater.
run a lateral over there, it's actually downhill, I think.
downhill.
No, it's not. It could be.
This is shallow groundwater, so these are actually more shallower units.
Well,
Not groundwater, the shallow rock, that's why these units are shallow, these are the ones we have the depth on.
so,
So now I have to try to maximize in an area, where we have shallow, I have to look at all the past data, but that's, from our field inspectors, that's the results they were getting.
No, understood.
Yeah.
As, again, a point of interest from my standpoint, if you had the preferred plan that's approved, how would you service the septic area? I would imagine that the county would probably request you to build out the expansion, but where are the tanks and where would they be pumped from? How would that be
Tanks
accessed?
are-
What's that?
The tank's right here where I'm showing my little.
So they have to go
hand,
around and behind the house, okay.
yeah, little two, or you probably get to here and then run a hose, get to pump it out.
Get to where?
This is all flat up in here.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Yeah, and then run a hose, we have to pump it out.
Okay, well, I'm sure it's doable, so I understand.
so, if I could make a suggestion. This is one of these cases where I believe that if the alternative driveway, which I actually didn't think it was going to work. And I was surprised to see that it's so close to 16%, which still makes our town engineer, Bob Cioli, a little uncomfortable, but it might be within the realm of something which is doable and acceptable if you massage the elevation of the house itself by a foot or two. That it actually works from that point of view. And so the question I would ask is, if you never had the opportunity to, for whatever reason, to do the preferred driveway, and this was the only driveway that you had, the only access you could possibly get, would you not develop the property? Could you not develop the property?
It kind of takes me back to the original design where we were getting a little bit of backlash on the steep slopes. So that driveway went to 16%. So now we're getting pushed down there and we're going back to the steep driveway. It's also, 16% driveway is, for a homeowner, you probably don't wanna, you wouldn't want that either, 16% driveway, especially when our winters the way they are.
So
So the less the better.
Yeah, so, the answer to that,
Children, you don't want 16%.
the answer,
Because they'll be riding things down and crashing and everything else.
And then we're getting into guide rails with that layout, and it kind of snowballs into all this, safety issues. And plus, the vertical curves, like Bob was saying, there are some other, things we have to add to that profile.
okay,
Make
so
it fully work.
this whole conversation, this whole point of view that you're promoting here is predicated on the particular design of the house itself. If you have a steep slope here and what you're essentially proposing is a typical sort of tract style, developer style home with a, you know, a basement and a, you know, it's a box that wants to be on a flat piece of property. And if it seems to me that if the steep driveway is a concern, one might actually, if it turned out that you couldn't get anything other than this entrance to the property, you wouldn't, I don't know, I'm not sure that you'd walk away from the property. You might instead decide, well, let's see if we can design a house that works for this land asset here that we can, you know, make some money on. Instead of saying, well, we've decided it has to be this kind of house, therefore it drives every other decision on the site. And it's easy to do when you have a flat site or a gently sloping site, but this site is not amenable to that kind of a architectural solution, site plan solution, it seems to me. So I would say it would be up to you to figure out, we're not saying you can't put a house here. I mean, we're encouraging you to put a house here, we're encouraging you to put a house here which works from the point of view of the sorts of things that we have to worry about and be concerned about. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have to change the house, but you know, maybe now we're saying 16% is too much for X, Y, and Z for the future tenant. Okay, that's your decision, that's not ours. It's if Bob Cioli says it's an acceptable grade, then I think it would be, for my purposes, it's an acceptable grade.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that is the maximum grade based on chapter 60, 420 F8, yes.
Code.
Right, but again, it's balancing a number of factors, obviously we don't like to see 16%, but if it's something that will work and make this house work and then also help us in other areas with some of the other cut and fill, the rock walls and the sight lines and slopes and trees, et cetera, and number of cuts, maybe we have to live with that. Obviously, this is going to be a compromise balancing act here. This is
a tough site.
Very tough site, very
Really
difficult.
It's really tough.
That's all that's left in our town to a certain degree is these really tough sites. And we have regulations that we have to abide by and I'm sympathetic to the applicant. I hate this feeling that we're just horsing them around, but I agree with Tom. I thought that the alternative was just gonna be a non-starter. And I was expecting someone's gonna come back with 21%, and that's it, doesn't work. Okay, fine, that's gone. But this is something I think actually is interesting. I think it could work. And I think it could work as well or perhaps better than the other, but I don't wanna make that determination and send it to the state with that kind of determination without the information. So I would really encourage the applicant to flesh it out and then also to provide us with a comparative chart of the impacts. So we can really quantify and get our arms around it and say, we agree with you, we disagree with you, or what can we do? What can we do better? But from the standpoint of if we're going to go with track number 2, which is work with us and work with the state, we can do that at risk of the applicant wasting time on it. If you're going to go to the state first, then we'll just wait to hear from you before we consider looking at this application again. And we'll just come back to us when you're ready. Hopefully we'll have correspondence between the professionals and Bob Cioli, so we're apprised of what's going on. But I guess we leave it to the applicant to select which track they would like to go. I guess. Silence.
Sounds right.
Yep.
So
I guess Sabrina, how do we leave this? Do you wanna have some sort of something set up, check base, or the applicant checks base with us in the new year, tells us where they're going, how they're doing it? And
I think that's writing it,
Okay.
is Anthony, maybe you can reconvene with your client and kind of give us the path that you wanna move forward on, and we can try and incorporate you into coming back before the planning board when you have more of your plans developed.
And Bob and Sabrina have a really, I think, obviously have a pretty good idea of the sorts of things that we care about. I think we've been pretty clear about it, but I'd encourage you to keep in touch with them through this next part of the process to be sure that we're sort of all communicating and trying to be efficient on your behalf.
And I would hold out to the applicant if for some reason you feel that you need input from us, we can schedule for that kind of a meeting. Continue the informal hearing and see what it might be, if it would be helpful for us to provide any kind of guidance or clarity on any kind of issue that might come up with the state. But it would also be good before we look at this ever again, if we could get that opinion letter, in finding and determining once and for all that it really is the state that owns the property. And then I guess Bob has given you the the Christmas card mailing list for all the professionals to touch base with on this application. So, okay.
Any questions, Anthony, are you alright?
No, I mean, I gotta touch base with my client, I know was never happy about this other alternative, and we changed the house a few times, changed the driveway a few times, so I gotta touch base with him
Sure, we understand.
to discuss.
I mean, and the bottom line too is maybe you can bifurcate the state process and go in and speak with them and see what it is they would be looking for or willing to allow within the right of way, or are they going to sell you the right of way area, and instead of you who knows how they're gonna handle it, but to get a sense of what they're looking for, and then come back to the planning board and talk to the board about what the state is looking for, and kind of bifurcate your process with the state maybe,
Yeah.
so, who knows?
Well, that's what the
Alrighty,
problems.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the next item on the agenda, we received a very late email that Chapel Crossing would like to adjourn from this meeting. There was some issues, so they need to postpone their appearance before you.
Okay, well, this was as close as we could schedule to Christmas, so I don't understand why they would cancel.
I think there's personal matters with some of their team that they couldn't come tonight, so.
Okay.
Well, the holidays just aren't gonna be the holidays
Yes,
this year.
exactly.
I know.
Alrighty, well, okay, so our next item is a presentation of 50 North Greeley Avenue. So we have I guess representatives of the applicants here. Welcome. It's not often we find any live people here. Outside of us, we're alive, sort of. So this is a presentation by the Gray Organsky Architecture regarding proposed mixed-use residential building at 50 North Greeley.
We are. State your name.
Jeffrey Davis from Baird Development Holdings. We are the applicant with the owner of the property, Don Feinberg and family. So we are planning to build a residential and retail building at the former Rite Aid site in town. So one of the things we do when we come into a town is we wanna meet with the elected officials, representatives from the community, and kind of get everybody's intake of what they'd like to see on the site. So the first thing we started to hear was how much affordability was wanted in the building, how much retail was wanted, what type of retail was wanted, and we started planning from there. So when you see our presentation, you'll notice we went in with a family-oriented restaurant concept on the first floor. We widened the sidewalks on the street. We went from 10% affordable up to 12 with a combination of affordable and workforce housing, so 10% being affordable, 2% being workforce. We took our retail footprint and it's a little over 4,000 square feet now.
So 2% workforce, how many units?
So that'll make it essentially,
One unit?
what did we say this?
One
One
unit.
unit, yeah. We have come up with an interesting parking concept where it'll be a 1-to-1 parking ratio for the residential. We'll have car sharing for the residential units as well, where you'll be able to actually rent an electric vehicle, so you don't have to have an extra car or a car at all if you don't want to. and be able to use a car around town, take it for a couple hours a day, long weekend if you'd like. We'll have electric scooters, electric bikes, plenty of bike parking, scooter parking, etc. Not to mention we're right down the street from the train station. We'll additionally have some parking for the commercial, as well as on-street parking as well. So in total, we'll have 53 parking spots with 45 parking spots for the 45 apartments and the 8 for the commercial and car sharing. There's been a whole load of studies going on around the country about car sharing and the use of cars throughout the country, that you don't actually need as many cars as we think we do anymore. We'll dig into that a little bit further. Being that we're so close to the train station, we think this is an ideal development that doesn't need to be so parking centric and can really take advantage of the downtown area and the train station and the community that's here. One thing you'll notice, and even looking at the slide that's up here, and as we go through it with Andrew, you'll notice how wide the sidewalk is here. So we've really just increased with an additional 8 feet of sidewalk area for that open concept to have just that much green space and additional space for residents as well as the community. We thought it was very important to make this just an open plan and increase that area. And I'm really gonna turn this over to Andrew. You're not gonna wanna hear this from me because I'm gonna just mess it up. But this is gonna be a completely green, mass timber, sustainable building with a 0 carbon footprint. And I'm gonna pass this on to him.
Go ahead.
You're gonna do this.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Andrew Ruff. I'm with Greer Gansky Architecture, based in New Haven. So we're leading the design team for this project. We have a presentation that walks through the project as currently designed. I know there's more discussion about the kind of planning special permit language that is kind of paired with this project. So Phil will talk about that, and I'm happy to elaborate on some of the sustainability metrics that are part of that. But we'll talk about the project as kind of an example of how that framework could be enacted and essentially the types of development it would encourage. Whoever's driving it could go to the next slide. Is that you or is that the mysterious? Okay. We've given this presentation a couple times to the town board in the past, so please tell me to hurry along if you've watched this presentation before. But this is a view of the current site. This was taken back in, I believe, in June from essentially south of the site with the current Rite Aid. Next slide. And generally what we're proposing is exactly as Jeff described it. At the ground floor level, it's a mixture of public open space, retail space that is facing onto the activated sidewalk, amenity spaces for the residential tenants, and then along the rear of the property alongside Metro North, the 53 parking spaces that are effectively shielded from the street by the building, the kind of the occupied spaces of the building itself. And so you'll see this more in the plans, but what you can see is there's kind of clearly defined increased areas of sidewalk that become actual public spaces. You know, they're not, a nominal space. It's in some cases 30 feet deep. So it's actually seating. It's part of the restaurant. It's part of the retail. It's part of the amenity space for the tenants. And so really trying to find a way in which that this development can increase the life at the street level. Not only for the residents of the building, but for people in town who might want to come and enjoy the restaurant or partake in the retail. So next slide, please. So again, this is the current existing site plan in all its beautiful dilapidated condition, which we were all very excited to try to steer it away from. I'll note, then we see how this later, that currently one of the challenges with the site, other than the fact that it is sitting empty, is that it's 88% impervious, and so this is not a particularly effective contribution to the town's stormwater management. Essentially, all of the water sheds off of this very quickly, and so in high rain events, this is a problematic condition, and certainly it's something that will continue to be problematic as rain events become more intense. And so if you go to the next slide, so this is the proposed ground floor that was diagrammed earlier. You can see a little more clearly how we have the 53 parking spaces along the rear of the property abutting the tracks. And then we have essentially a shroud of amenity spaces, commercial spaces, retail spaces, fronting onto the public sidewalk. In the center, that fairly thin yellow bar, that is bike parking. So we have, as Jeff mentioned, a fairly generous amount of bicycle parking for the residents, more than 1-to-1. Given that we understand the chap line is a goal of the city, and we'd be at the kind of northern terminus of the chap line. That's certainly a mode of transportation that this development would like to encourage, and having that as a very public facing amenity onto the street, really signaling to both the tenants and to the town that this is a viable means of transportation that this project is embracing.
So on this first floor,
Yeah.
The red is basically exterior sidewalk and open space outside.
No,
outdoors,
so
right?
the red is retail. Yeah,
This
so
is store, this is the outside area, right?
exactly, correct, yeah.
And what is this, the gray and green?
So those are back of house mechanical spaces, storage
Okay.
spaces, right?
And then all of this area,
That's all the parking.
all residential?
Parking.
Oh, parking.
Parking,
Oh, it's all
parking,
parking.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So there's no residential units at the ground floor.
So where is the commercial parking again?
So it is within that 53 spaces in that single parking lot.
It's actually in that parking lot,
That's correct.
in that dead end parking lot?
That's correct.
Okay.
So I have a question. On the first slide, the building compared to the existing buildings looked like it was only a two-story building that you proposed.
So what we were showing in that diagram was just the ground floor, to show the composition of the ground floor.
I didn't catch that, alright.
And so how would the parking lot be accessed?
You can see at the northern end, there's an opening, so it's a two-way entrance.
Here?
Nope, I can go and point.
Right, there.
Okay.
So right next to the bike.
Got it, yep. got it.
Yeah, I mean, for obvious geometric reasons, as well as the orientation of the site to the town, the southern end is much more valuable. We actually have the
Right.
space to have usable retail space, and that's obviously where most people will be interacting with the building. And so we're really pushing as much as we can the public facing program of the building at the ground floor to that end, and the north becomes much more about parking access and tenant amenities. So if you're going there, you have an actual reason to go to the far end of the site.
Okay.
So, well, should we just let you continue? I'm sorry.
I just wanna follow the map, that's all.
Yeah.
I have no, this is not comment, I'm just trying to follow.
No, that's fine. Feel free to,
Exactly.
yeah, that's fine.
Okay, I'll have questions at the end. You can.
Okay, right. Yeah, if you wanna go to the next slide, so we'll go up to a typical residential floor plate. Great, so as you can see in the organization of the plan, the yellow is amenity and circulation space, that's towards the west of the site along the railroad tracks. And what we've been very intentional about is not having any of the residential units face onto the tracks. So it's obvious acoustic reasons, light, air, safety, and that is a cost essentially to the project. I mean, we're taking away one of the, it's a 430-foot long facade that we're essentially seeding over to essentially back of house uses. And so in order to make up for that and to ensure that all of the residents have quality access to natural light, to ventilation, to privacy, we've created a series of these three courtyards. And so the essentially the bars of the building are running generally perpendicular to North Greeley. It presents essentially a smaller volume on North Greeley than if we were to say do a 350-foot street wall. And it also guarantees that the residents have public space, garden space that is essentially concealed from the train tracks by the building itself. And so we think that this also offers advantages to the residents along North Greeley. So this is acting as a shield to either the noise of the train, the view of the lovely bus depot across North Greeley, and so giving it essentially a better backdrop building than what currently exists. And so the apartments themselves, it's a mixture of mostly 2 and 1 bedrooms. There's 1 studio at each level. And as Jeff mentioned, that 12% combination of affordable and workforce would be equally distributed across all those types of units. Any questions on this plan? Great. Go up to the next slide, please. And then just looking at the roof plan. One of the goals of this project is not only to improve the permeable ratio of the current site, but to really exceed what the standards might be for a development of this scale. And so one of the strategies, both in terms of the courtyards as well as the roofs, is looking at opportunities for green roofs and specifically ones that can meet the DEC standards for green roofs that actually filter water and retard the flow onto the street. And so this is something that our civil engineer Langen is working with us on. And we understand that this particular area of North Greeley has been prone to flooding in the past, and so if this can actually act as a sponge, retard that flow, let the system clear, and then discharge at a later time, we imagine this is a fairly valuable amenity to the infrastructure of Chappaqua. So next slide. So this is a section looking to the north. And so on the west, you can see the train tracks and the bus depot. On the east, you can see the rise up to King Street. And so this is to help give a sense of the scale of the building. It is 4 stories with a max average height at the slope of 50 feet, which is, if in isolation of perhaps of North Greeley, a large building. But if you look at it within the immediate context of the neighborhood, you actually see that very quickly the King Street townhomes are actually taller than this building and looking out across the rooftop rather than having their view obscured by the actual facade. Next slide, please. This is just a quick rendering of the elevation. So again, you can see essentially the 4 primary volumes of the building facing onto North Greeley, and then receding into the background a bit is that linear strip that faces onto the railroad. So this doesn't present to the street as a single monolithic development. It would present more as 4 volumes with an activated ground floor space. Next slide, please. And just a slightly more detailed version of that section. And so probably worth pointing out, we have a few challenges on the site. So one of them obviously is the proximity to Metro North. It is at a higher elevation than essentially our average site, and so we need a way to retain. And so using the parking at grade to kind of make up some of that retainage towards Metro North. We are at each of these courtyards creating a fairly deep recess, and so that ranges from 50 feet to 20 feet as you move up the site. So it creates a fairly large courtyard for the residents to enjoy. These would be for the residents of the building, not open to the public, but certainly planted in such a way that as you move King Street, this would become the foreground. You'd be seeing planting in front of the buildings essentially. And then obviously you can see we have some balconies, and so every of these residential units has outdoor space, private outdoor space, whether it's an inset balcony or a balcony that's suspended from the facade. Next slide. The material palette of the building, the intention is that we would be using some kind of engineered wood siding as the primary siding material. We'd be utilizing a masonry cladding at the base, and then where we do have more of a storefront condition at the commercial, retail, and amenity, we'd be utilizing a curtain wall system with a timber frame. And the materiality of this is important for a few reasons. If you go to the next slide, please. So the material strategy for this building is actually mass timber construction for the entire project. Perhaps safer parts of the parking garage, but otherwise it would all be based out of engineered timber. And so this is a project that's currently under construction that our office designed in New Haven. There's a few other examples in the slide deck. For those of you unfamiliar with what this means from a materials perspective, engineered timber is laminated dimensional lumber, cross-laminated timber, nail-laminated timber. But the end effect is you're taking smaller dimensional pieces of lumber, you're laminating them either mechanically or through adhesive into large format panels that are up to 10 feet by 50 feet long. And so these can produce floor decks, it can produce walls, ceilings, basically the entire building structure and envelope can be produced out of timber, which is then insulated and clad. And this gives a number of benefits that we think is really important to this project. One, it turns the project into a giant carbon sink. So all of the carbon that was sequestered by those trees over the course of its life, instead of being returned to the atmosphere when it's either burned or biodegraded, is stored in essentially a durable building. And so that building will be around for 150 years minimum, let's say. In which time that carbon will remain locked up in the building. It also is incredibly airtight, and so instead of building, let's say, a wall assembly out of dozens of 2x4s and then sheathing and then membrane, you have 4 joints at each side of the monolithic panel, and then you have a continuous layer of exterior insulation. And so it produces a very well insulated, very airtight construction. And then beyond that, it has numerous benefits of living inside with exposed natural materials. It can regulate the indoor air humidity by absorbing and desorbing moisture. So as the quality of the residence life, the quality of essentially the construction of it, so that contributing to the performance of the building itself, and then for the construction, because you can see this is what you see here went up in about 5 days. They come prefabricated, pre-drilled. They go together. It's a bit of a cliche, like a set of Legos. So really, the only activity you see on site, maybe the next slide can better illustrate this, is that you have a crane operator, you have a foreman, and you have a handful of carpenters with screw guns. And that, for the erection of your entire building structure and potentially enclosure, is your site crew.
Are the structural, old-fashioned, structural beams consist of the same sort of timber material?
Yeah, so the traditional way you might think about this is glue lam, which I'm sure you've seen around. So that technology was developed in the 1910s, 1920s. They took that basically same principle and applied it to basically cross-laminating. So you get 2 axes of strength rather than a single axis of strength. And so glue lam beams and columns are absolutely can be part of this. The big difference is that you went from a kind of a single linear element to a plate element. And so now you're basically replicating what concrete can do as a construction system. And so for infill, let's say urban style construction, this has a number of advantages that we think are appropriate for this building.
So are you suggesting that it's essentially built from a kit of panels, and there really is, as a consequence, there is really no need for beams and columns?
There can be a reduction of beams and columns. There are versions of it where you have, and you'll see this actually.
Your design proposal for the site.
We're a little early for that.
Okay.
But no, that's fine. So this particular example is a multifamily building. It has no beams. It has no columns. It is all panelized construction. So it's kind of a honeycomb.
Mm-hmm.
If you advance a couple of slides.
So can I ask? This technology is proposed for ground floor up or on top of the retail level?
It would be ground floor up. Yeah. So this technology in the current 2021,
including the parking garage.
It can be, absolutely. There are parking garages built out of this.
Okay.
And our benefit is that we have the parking on a slab, so we're not driving on top of wood, which people have done. It's fairly uncommon, but in this case, it's just a ceiling surface.
You should have one great for the
right,
parking.
exactly. So this is an example of an apartment building that uses more of a post and beam with a floor plate. One of the big advantages of this system generally is that the spanning dimension of the panel, you're able to span, let's say, 13 feet with a 6-inch panel. And so if you were to compare that to conventional wood framing, you might have a 2-foot deep web joist. And so what that means when we begin to add stories on top of each other is that we're able to essentially get more building out of a lower overall height. And so, when we understand this is a very fairly height conscious area of town, and so we're able to accommodate the fairly intense needs of not only a retail space, but a commercial kitchen, ventilation, exhaust, acoustics, as well as 3 additional levels of residential above that, while still keeping the height below 50 feet.
So let me ask then, because there's gonna have to be provision somewhere for plumbing and
of course.
electrical and
Absolutely.
conduits and all that stuff and chases and so on.
Yep.
So in a typical residential application, what do you end up with a floor to ceiling depth?
Sure. It varies generally. So one of the challenges with building like this is that it is, it's just like building a giant musical instrument. It's very acoustically live. And so in order to produce the right acoustic separation, you have to do a couple things. One is you have to add mass. And so typically that's achieved by adding a thin either gypcrete or concrete topping screed on top. So maybe 1 to 3 inches deep on top of the timber. And then some kind of acoustic decoupling membrane. And so that typically is sufficient to produce a fairly robust sound isolation between levels, between units. And so that adds, 3 to 4 inches at max to the overall floor construction. And so really, depending on the span, you're looking at something about 8-9 inches maximum depth.
So floor to floor is.
Oh, so floor to floor. In our case, we're saying it's 10 feet floor to floor.
So where do you run,
Yeah.
there's ceiling fixtures here, where do you
Yes.
run the conduits?
Yeah. So typically when you have a topping slab, you can utilize the
In the
conduit
cavity.
through the slab above, dropping down. And then it's just really intentional placement of all of the vertical runs. And so it's just
Got it.
planning ahead. I mean, it's a different philosophy than if you were to design something that inherently has cavities in it.
So that's buried in the sandwich, if you said 8-9 inches,
Yeah, and certainly there would be areas with drop ceilings. That would be nice. I think the next slide might have, or if you advance past it, no, if you go back 2 slides, there's a good image. Oh, it's disappeared. Okay, that's fine. So in some places, certainly over bathrooms, over kitchens, you might have a drop ceiling, but generally you're able to benefit from that higher floor to floor allowance.
I presume this obviously meets New York State Building Code, but
Absolutely.
what's the grading on this for fire?
So it's incredibly resilient to fire. So this is a great example of it. So this is like I said, this is New Haven. This is currently under construction. This is the continent's tallest mass timber elevator shaft.
Mhm.
So this is 75-foot tall elevator shaft constructed entirely of these CLT panels. So it's balloon framed. So each panel is 36.5 feet tall, stacked on top of each other, and this has a 2-hour rating. And this has been proven by a whole host of fire tests. So not only independent manufacturers doing fire tests, but the ATF has done extensive fire testing of this. Department of Defense has done fire and blast testing of this. So there's a whole host of Department of Defense Army-based facilities being built out of this. The benefit is that it is a monolithic product, and that wood, when exposed to fire, it chars, and that char layer becomes insulative layer. And so as long as you're factoring in that char into the calculations, it essentially buffers that interior core and it remains viable as a structural element. And so unlike, let's say, steel, when exposed to a certain temperature in a fire condition, it has a catastrophic failure. This is essentially insulated by itself and is more stable and predictable in its fire performance.
Well, I would just wonder about the so-called chimney effect when heat builds up. And it's my understanding that some of these technologies actually don't last that long. And in fact, we've had some catastrophic fires in Westchester where things have collapsed. I don't think it was this construction.
No, it was not.
Other kinds. Where the old conventional beams actually last long. But
Yep. So in the current International Building Code, which New York State has adopted most of, you can use this up to 18 stories. So there's actually a 22-story building in Milwaukee built out of this material. There's a number of 20+ story buildings under construction. So the height of this is we're kind of well below what would be allowed of this material class.
So structurally, it's essentially an assemblage of shear panels.
It can be, yeah. That's one way to think about it. Sure.
Well, it has to be, otherwise it's gonna fall down, right? I mean,
Well,
it's rigid.
In
because
this
it's-
configuration, yes. In this
Yes.
particular,
Right.
Yeah. Mhm.
Right. Okay.
sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Pretty interesting.
No, we
Fascinating.
have material samples of it if you're interested in seeing it up close. But yeah, I can keep going through if you want to go to the next I guess 3 slide. So there's the slide that disappeared. There's the drop ceiling. Go to the next slide, please. Next slide.
Are these your projects you're showing?
The first ones that are under construction were ours, and the other ones were not ours, but completed. Those are in Portland, Oregon. So these are just some renderings of the proposed development. So this is looking from the southeast, looking across the street, Susan Lawrence to the left. And so you're seeing what would be at the ground floor, the diner concept, and then the 4 bars of residential moving up towards the north end of North Greeley. Next slide.
Does the
Mhm.
facade, you said it was some sort of, does it patina over time, or
Yeah.
is there, okay.
Yes, so
Is that the intention?
yeah, so I think one of the overarching principles of the development is, as Jeff mentioned, so we're looking at materials that are sustainable, that are regenerative. We're looking at building performance systems that are minimal energy use, and looking at the facade itself. one of the opportunities is to utilize a wood-based facade, something else that's, you know, bio-based and carbon storing. And so there's a kind of a whole host of material classes within a wood-based facade. So what we're looking at particularly, and have again samples of this to look at if you're interested, is an acetylated or thermally modified wood. And so it's essentially a stabilized wood that has, unlike maybe traditional wood that has to be re-oiled every 2 years, this comes with a 50-year warranty, and it's really just been baked at a really low temperature. And it essentially eradicates all the things that people that would like to either degrade or be eaten. And so it essentially sterilizes, for lack of a better term, the wood. And so there's a whole host of ways in which you can treat that and aesthetically, but then on the durability side, it's basically the same as if you were to put fiber cement. This is a view looking essentially in the middle of the property, looking south towards the main courtyard space, towards the diner. And you can see, again, the dimension of the sidewalk that we've kind of allowed for at this is fairly expansive. Next slide, please. This is from within one of the residential elevated courtyards, looking out towards King Street. So again, this would be a pretty important feature amenity for the residents, given that this is their primary view, their primary outdoor space, and really taking care to make this a special kind of destinations within the project.
Are we looking west?
We look into the east.
East.
Yeah, you're looking at King Street,
Okay.
Tunnels, yeah,
But
up the hill.
is this slab on grade or are you on top of the parking lot?
You're on top of the parking garage.
Okay.
Yeah, yep, exactly.
Retail.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
So your back is to the railway.
Yeah,
To the
rail
track.
station.
Yep. Next slide. And a slight aerial, again from the southeast, showing the kind of the full context of the project and how certainly our goal would be to enhance the view of the neighbors as they look out to the west over the train line at the bus depot and perhaps offering a more attractive alternative to what currently exists.
You want to tell us about the green roofs?
Sure. There's a whole host of ways in which you can. So obviously, we're showing roofs that are not flat. We're showing kind of a series of serrated roofs for a variety of reasons. One, to add opportunities for solar panels, on-site solar generation with about half the roofs canted towards the south, to add some visual interest, given the scale of the building, to respond to the kind of roof forms that we see elsewhere along Greeley, and then. Planting on the roofs is something that we've done fairly extensively in our practice, and it's certainly a very common practice in the Northeast. These would be locally.
Sedum.
Yeah, sedum. It'd be a thin layer. Yeah, we're not talking about a fully intensive green roof with a kind of soil depth more amenable towards kind of shrubs or bushes. But this is something that would be very low maintenance, native materials. Yeah. Next slide. And so these are just a few aerials just showing the project within the existing site context. Again, these are some drone photographs taken from earlier this summer. So looking south from close to the train station towards the north. Next slide. Getting a little bit closer in on this particular block. And next slide. And finally, from the northeast, looking down along North Greeley. Next slide, please. Yep. So this is just a zoning and building code data. We can talk about this in more detail. Again, this is going to mirror what Phil outlines in terms of the special permit language, and this is that language is really written around the type of building that we've proposed here. So happy to dive into any of this in more detail now, or we can wait until after Phil goes for questions, whichever you prefer.
I'm ready to hear from Phil.
Okay, great.
So,
Terrific, thank you very much.
thank you.
I take your seat. No.
So, good evening. My name is Philip Carmel. I'm a lawyer representing the applicant. And my job tonight is to talk about the zoning that we propose to facilitate the project that we're proposing. So we're not here for site plan approval yet. We will be, I hope soon. We're not here for the special permit yet. We will be soon, I hope. The real reason we're here is the town board has referred the zoning to the planning board for your review and recommendation, comments, positive, negative, questions, whatever your your review yields. So I'm here to describe the zoning for you, and if there's questions, I'll try to answer them. If you have questions that I don't know how to answer, we can submit a follow-up letter after the meeting, if that would be helpful to you. So one of the key aspects of the zoning is we wanted to make sure that the town had control over the project. So I think Andrew is a wonderful architect, but maybe someone else will come along who's not as good an architect, and we wanted to make sure the town had adequate levers of control over the whoever would develop consistent with the zoning. So the way the zoning is structured, there's a special permit that's required and site plan approval. The planning board would be in charge of site plan approval, and the town board would issue the special permit. So to get the project approved, we would need the approval of both the planning board and the town board. So that's one type of control. And then the special permit has a number of very specific requirements that are set forth in the proposed zoning text that would amend the town zoning code. And I'm not gonna go through the whole thing. I'm sure you guys can read. But I'm gonna try to highlight some of what I think are some of the key criteria that are pertinent to your review of the proposed zoning text. So you have it in front of you, I hope. I didn't come with slides, so you have it. Okay, great. So I'm on page 1, and I'm gonna kind of march through it and just make some pertinent observations that I hopefully will help orient you towards what we're trying to accomplish. The purpose and intent is laid out. This is called NG0, net North Greeley Net Zero, and they're very stringent environmental performance standards that we'll be getting to, but that's a fundamental element of the zoning. In B, special development standards.
Well, can we look at that for a second? Cause I had
Yes.
questions. Some of these concepts were difficult for me to understand. So I don't wanna cut them off without, being my usual self and not being intelligent about this. So anyway, I understand some of these goals, but I don't understand explain to me, so I fully understand, what is, carbon neutral construction process? Is that just because we're just gonna have a single crane there? Is that the thought?
I think that if you look at the life cycle of the project, it will be carbon neutral. That is the goal. There's gonna be no fossil fuel boilers in the project. It's gonna be 100% electric in terms of the operation. And in terms of the construction materials, as Andrew explained, it sequesters carbon in the building material itself. It's a natural
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think we understand that. I thought the question, which I also have, is what's a carbon neutral construction process? Not product, you're talking about the product. The question is, I think,
process.
Is process.
The practice of the construction process itself.
How's that carbon neutral? Cause if we're gonna write this in, if the town's gonna write this into the code, I think it needs to be something that makes sense. And maybe it makes sense, but somebody should elicit that and elucidate that so that, there's some backing for the statement that's proposed.
I think that's a very good observation. I don't think there's specific criteria for the construction practice itself, the construction equipment that's there. So that's a good comment. That may warrant further attention by the town board.
My general comment on the purposes and intent, I certainly understand the purpose and intent, the overall obviously goals, and I think they are consistent with, our comprehensive plan. But there's a lot of word baggage in here that I think needs to be tightened up. I mean, I'd really like to hit things that really make sense, because it's not buildings that are gonna make people healthy, it's you know, it just needs to be tightened up. I mean, I have a much better understanding now, thank you for the presentation. I actually have a little bit more insight in terms of what you mean by some of these things. But I still think we'll probably tussle with this a little bit and get some information back to you folks. At least from my standpoint, I think it would be you know, I don't know how buildings, you know, increase the productivity of residents, workers and visitors, or the health. You know, these are just words. To me, it's mush. And we're talking about zoning, and zoning should not be mush. It needs to be something that really makes good sense for what we wanna do and for the approval process. And of course, an overriding concern I have is making sure that this is not so tailored to this one spot that we are accused of doing something that we ought not to be doing in zoning, that it should be broad enough to take into account the balance of North Greeley. I think it does, I think it will, I think we probably need to work on that, but that would be an overarching concern that I would have.
Right, I mean, this is the purpose and intent, this is not setting forth the requirements, this is the overall
Right.
vision. So I think I agree with you that you know, zoning should be very objective in terms of its requirements, but this particular paragraph, it might be a little more leeway is appropriate. But I hear your comment, and I'm sure the planning board is gonna have comments for the town board, and that's great. I mean, I'm not here to tell you not to do your job, so you're gonna have comments.
You know, correct, right? But you are here that will help us understand what your purpose and intent is
Yes.
in the language that you have drafted for the town to review.
Right, this is, just to be clear, this is actually a combination of language that we proposed and that has been commented on and edited by the town planner and the town attorney. So this is a
Good to know,
a
thank you.
combination of those two things.
Of course, yeah.
But we are clearly the
Authors.
the prime movers of this.
Sure.
I'm not gonna try to claim otherwise, because that's what
Pretty
happens.
evident,
Yeah.
pretty evident.
I think that the way I would understand this is if you're able to sort of tie this back to actual carbon neutrality goals, right? So if you're talking about parking ratios, you're talking about and reduction of that and what that has in terms of carbon neutral, like I think that would be a good structure to explain the overall concept and of what we're trying to achieve. So absolutely everything whatever you're doing there is helping get towards it, but it's almost like there needs to be an underlying layer that we can then sort of codify so that it can be used elsewhere too, which is what I think Bob's alluding to.
Well, sure, I think after we go through all of the requirements, then maybe
Yeah.
you can go back and look at this purpose and intent and say, well, some of this makes more sense than others, and
Right.
you'll make whatever recommendations.
So like reduction in parking is definitely one of them, the fact that you have green roofs, there is value that you're bringing in, the fact that there's no water runoff, or you've addressed some of that. So I think really codifying or talking about that would be helpful for everyone to sort of instead of just being sort of a high level statement, because I think what Bob's saying, or at least that's how I would interpret it.
Right, but there are specific requirements, so let's go through them, because some of them are
Yeah.
directly responsive to
Go
what
ahead.
is set forth here. So the site requirements are lower down on the same page. And we've circumscribed which areas of the town are potentially eligible for this type of special permit. It has to be in the BRP district, that's our district. In other words, that's the site, that's the district for our site. And it also says BR, the zoning district, that was recommended by the town professional staff. And there's a minimum lot area of 33,000 square feet, we qualify. And if you look at these two things, there's one other site that would be potentially eligible for this special permit, which is the site to our north. It's a somewhat awkward site, it's larger than our site, but it's very thin along the railroad tracks. But that is in the BR district, and that is more than 33,000 square feet. So that would be another potential site for the special permit. And those, in my understanding, those are the only two sites in the town of Newcastle that would be eligible, given the criteria that are set forth here.
Well, it's also North Greeley, so North Greeley is a finite street anyway,
Right,
so
exactly.
it's a finite district.
Yes, but so it's just important to remember, there's two sites that are eligible, not just our site.
Yes, understood.
Okay. Dwelling units are specified by type. It can be studios, 1 bedroom and 2 bedrooms.
Are we specifying that they are only going to be rentals? Are there any fee components in this, fee ownership?
That's not in the zoning. I think it's our intention to have a rental project, but that distinction is typically not drawn in zoning in my experience.
I think you're correct, but by the same token, in the purpose and intent, it does speak in terms of diversity of affordability of different housing types, so at least I interpret that sometimes to be different kinds of arrangements. Affordable workforce, rental, market, some own, maybe not, I mean, I just wanted to clarify, I have no position on it, just wanted to understand that was the intention.
Our intention is a rental apartment building with ground floor retail and with the affordability that was previously discussed. The bicycle parking, there's specific requirements that are set forth here. There is a requirement in this that it be a mixed-use project. So there's some flexibility about how much commercial space, but it is supposed to be a mixed-use project. That's what's set forth towards the bottom of page 2.
So what would be where do we see that in terms of mixed use and retail, in terms of minimums or maximums? Is it appropriate to propose that?
Well, it has to be on the ground floor.
Right.
We have not specified a minimum. The maximum is inherent in the concept of ground floor plus
Well, and also the configuration to a certain extent, of course.
Exactly.
But I'm just wondering if the town board had any input on that and any suggestions.
There's no minimum or maximum set forth in the special permit. Obviously, our application for site plan approval is gonna have to give you guys a site plan, and
Right.
it will specify a specific configuration for the building. We have minimum requirements in terms of the lot area. We're planning, as will be shown in our site plan application, 45 dwelling units. That will be our proposal, and that will satisfy these criteria here. There's requirements for green infrastructure. There's requirements for impervious coverage. And then there's parking issues are addressed on the bottom of page 3 and the next page. And I think parking is, we've been told, is an important issue for the town and an issue of potential concern. So that's gonna be something that warrants careful consideration.
So your proposal here is one space. How, if any, does it differ from our current requirement for residential in this district?
We are certainly proposing less parking than is required by the town zoning currently. Our proposal is to have 53 parking spaces and 45 dwelling units. So that our idea is one space per dwelling unit and then 8 commercial spaces. Although the exact management of the parking lot has not been decided, but it'd be shared parking. Certainly, if we're gonna have any type of significant retail at all, the town code would require a lot more than 8 spaces. So
do we require more on residential at this point?
Yes, also residential. So we are
So what percentage reduction are you proposing in each commercial as well as residential from our current code?
I'm not sure I can answer that question, but certainly the commercial, I think the residential is 1.2, is that right?
1.3.
1.3, thank you. For residential, so that, I guess, I can't do the math so well in my head, but that'd be about 20%, 25% less than 1.3. And the commercial would be much more. For our project is perhaps 4,200 square feet of commercial. You'll see in the site plan application. And the exact parking requirements in the town code would differ depending on the division between retail and restaurant. Restaurants have more parking under the town code than retail. But applying the town code, you could have the requirement for 30 or 40 spaces, just for the commercial.
So let me ask the question a different way. If you were required, given your development program now, the number of units and the amount of retail which you're proposing, applying the existing parking requirements, how many spaces would you need?
Well, as I say, it depends on the mix of
Commercial restaurant, for example.
the retail component of the commercial versus the restaurant component of the commercial.
Yeah, it does, but give me a number.
It would be, could be 80 or 90 spaces. I don't wanna try to represent an exact number to you,
No, I
but
understand.
it would be much more than what we're proposing.
Right. The order of magnitude is important for us to understand, at least at this preliminary level, the nature of the ask
Yes.
and the impact on the town as a consequence of that.
Right, so there are standards set forth in the special permit for evaluating our parking proposal. I'll get to those in a second, but let me just discuss the underlying rationale for the whole thing.
Sure.
Which is, we are trying to build a green project that is less auto centric than a traditional housing proposal in the suburbs. We are right next to the train station. We are near, right next to two bus lines that go through the town. We're gonna have shared automobiles so that people can access automobiles that they don't own. And we're trying to take advantage of a different type of lifestyle. That's who we're trying to attract here. Not people who own 2 cars. I don't think that's our target market.
Right, of course not.
And if you look at the criteria that are set forth in the special permit language we've proposed, it does require showing that there's adequate space off-site. So we've done a parking study that demonstrates that there is adequate spaces within walking distance of the project to accommodate the parkers who will not be able to park on site. We'll have to present that parking study to the planning board. We may have to do more parking studies. Town planner hasn't told us that our parking study is sufficient at this point, so we're collecting data. We're gonna have to present that data to the town board and to the planning board. And we are confident that there'll be sufficient parking on-site and off-site. In terms of practicality with this site, if the town wanted more parking, we would just either get rid of the commercial altogether. We'd have to change the entire concept of the mixed use, because it's really the commercial that's driving a tremendous amount of parking, which cannot be feasibly accommodated on our
Or
site.
really shrink it very considerably too.
Right, so it could be shrunk very considerably,
Reduce the
not have a
retail. Yeah, that's what I'm
restaurant.
saying, right.
Obviously, if we had a very small purely retail operation that had minimal parking generation, we might be able to accommodate a much higher percentage of the automobiles on site. But this is we are encouraging the town to think of this as a more transit accessible area that should be thought of differently than if we were proposing this building, 3 miles away from the train station. What we're proposing would not be appropriate for a location at a significant distance from the train station, nor would it be allowed, because as you observed, the special permit is not even potentially applicable to locations like that. So this is a policy issue for the town. Do you want to kind of continue requiring applicants, even at this location, to have a tremendous amount of parking? Or not? It's a policy issue for the town to decide. It's obviously the applicant's not gonna decide that. That's about planning board and the town board are gonna have to decide that. We will give you data that will help you understand the parking availability in the town.
And we'll have to, I think we'll have to have a really good understanding of some of the suppositions behind the data. We've heard about, ride sharing, and I think ride sharing kind of disappeared during COVID. So I mean, we heard about that and before, and I'm not poo-pooing it. I think it's valid, but there's a big difference here. So the suppositions and the assumptions need to be something that I think we're all comfortable, town board, planning board, comfortable that are realistic for our town. We hear about how people won't go in their cars, but I've seen people go from, the train station to just down the block because they won't walk and they drive. I mean, it's a matter of getting used to it also at some point perhaps.
Yeah.
I think we support and embrace what you're trying to do. We just wanna make sure it's not a problem.
Yeah, if I could, you're right, the town's gonna be looking at this and they're going to be asking us, and they already have, to help them look at this. And just to give you've been very generous in sharing your information and making a presentation of it. And there's just a lot to unpack here in terms of what your ask is, not only in terms of the content, but the procedures that you're recommending. I mean, the very notion of a special permit is, I think, a serious question, whether it's necessary or not. And that's one of the things that I think we'll be discussing with the town board, and you'll be finding out about that as we go through the process. With respect to the parking in particular, the notion, for example, of car sharing, we're all for TOD development. We got this train station, let's take advantage of it and build a better hamlet, right? But I don't think that car sharing we're still in the suburbs here. And car sharing makes sense if you're living in a condominium in Manhattan, where you only need it, once every other week to, go to the countryside to visit your parents or go on a picnic. I think that now I could be wrong about that, but my guess is that there will be, not only on that particular subject, but new ways of looking at these things aren't, as I think Bob is intimating, aren't necessarily going to be the new normal. And there should be some healthy skepticism about proposals that seem to be foreign to the way people live now and live here and live in the suburbs pretty much everywhere. And I think that that's something that you'll probably hear more of, and we would like to know more about. The other thing that is, I think, not gonna work, and I could be wrong, is the statement that there is plenty of parking available off-site to meet the parking demand requirements that the town may say you need to, what if they say you need to have 6 per thousand for retail? And your answer might be, well, we'll find it. And we'll find it using, distant lots at 250 feet away from the, there are provisions that you would want to put in place as a consequence of studies. My concern is that every parking space that you take off-site is, for your purposes, is an off-site parking space which somebody else in the future who wants to come in and develop their property is not available to them. And I think that, to me, that's a fundamental town policy in terms of how they deal with town board policy, how they deal with the equitability of zoning and the benefits, disbenefits, however they assign that capacity and those benefits to properties, not to people, but to properties. right? Throughout the hamlet and throughout the town. And parking is, from my way, I mean, we've looked at this. We don't have any studies, but we've sort of understood the problem. You know, the properties on South Greeley, I mean, on the other side of the street are severely disadvantaged with respect to parking. And I think if the town is going to be looking to develop all of North Greeley in a way which creates a real sort of village or hamlet environment, I think that those properties, just from that perspective, need to be paid attention to. And just from the equity perspective, need to be given a fair shake in the whole process. So, I mean, that's my feeling about it. And we've been around here a long time. That's my feeling about it, and I just want to let you know that's, I think, the kind of conversation that we're all gonna be in. I may be the minority voice in that, but you're gonna hear other people say a lot about parking in this, and you're right, it's a big question for the town.
Right, I think there's also been a change in thinking in terms of increased use of Uber and similar, taxi services.
That's what the studies are all about.
And, we will present data to the board and you'll evaluate the data. So Jeff, did you wanna?
No, I'm good.
Okay, so it's an issue and it's a policy issue for the town, as I mentioned. If you load on the parking requirements, we're just gonna have to get, essentially reduce the retail.
No, we
dramatically.
understand that.
So that's, cause we don't have room, we're not gonna build a structured parking garage. There's a parking lot across the street has a lot of availability. But I understand your point about
I'm sorry,
other properties.
I object to your language. If we load on the parking requirements, no, the parking requirements are there. If you decide it's your action that you're proposing to take off the parking requirements or to somehow morph the parking requirements in a way that make your project developable for you. So nobody's loading on parking requirements here. We aren't, the town isn't.
That's a fair point. I didn't
Yep.
mean to.
Language is important.
I didn't mean to imply anything otherwise. Obviously,
Nobody's
we
disadvantaging
are,
you.
as I've been very clear, we are asking for less parking than would otherwise be required by the town code. I wasn't trying to apply otherwise.
Very good.
And we understand it's gonna be, it's critical to your project, so I think it'll be very interesting to see what you develop and what you present to us.
Okay.
And help us understand this.
So just continuing on page 4, we have electric vehicle charging, because we anticipate that that's the way the world is going. And then there's very specific performance standards for the environmental sustainability of the building. In terms of green building standards, it has to be 100% electric. And the building materials have to meet certain standards that are specified on page 5, and the type of materials that Andrew mentioned in his presentation would satisfy those criteria, and we will demonstrate that in our application. There's open space requirements. There are bulk restrictions that are, I think, pretty easy to understand. The height on page 6 is limited to 60 feet or 4 stories. We believe that height is appropriate, given the slope that goes up and in the profiles that you saw in the slide presentation.
So the 60 feet, just to understand, I think that was at the peak, because I think you said it was averaging about 45 feet.
Average is 50.
Yeah, it's 50 feet average, but the roofs are peaked.
And that would be the top.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, just to detail, what is the proposed floor-to-floor height on the residential then?
Yeah, so the ground floor is a 15-foot clear height, and then approximately 10 feet floor to floor for the upper levels. And then, of course, we have roof. So the upper heights the max height is 55, so that includes elevator overrides, mechanical space, et cetera.
And then the back end of the law are the application procedures, which involves site plan approval, special permit approval, and architectural board of review approval, which you always have, for these types of projects in Newcastle. And it envisions joint hearings in front of the town board and the planning board with respect to the application for special permit and site plan approval would be joint hearings. So in the hopes of improving communication between the two boards and frankly making it more speeding things along for the applicant would be our goal also, because we want to build the project, obviously. So that gives you an overview of the zoning, and I'm happy to answer questions. I obviously have already had a lot of questions, but we look forward to the planning board's review, and if there's things that you think should be changed, obviously the town board will have to decide what to do about that, but we would be, we're interested in those comments.
Can I ask,
Go ahead, Eldad, I've spoken, please, go ahead.
I mean, I have lots of thoughts, but I will start at the tail end of the zoning piece of it. Just so I understand, I think I understand the limitations or the requirements that the special permit puts on you, the applicant. But what is the purpose of the special permit from your point of view? What is the ask here of the town from this, what is the purpose of the special permit? Is it just the parking? Is it parking in height? Why does the special permit exist? Why are you proposing a new special permit?
Well, I think it's to give another level of control over the project. The idea of it is a highly sustainable project that meets certain sustainability criteria. So I thought that would be appropriately incorporated into a special permit. In other words, we're seeking a trade-off, perhaps in some sense, that we're asking for 4 floors, which is an ask in the town of Newcastle. We're asking for less parking, which is an ask, and we are also promising a very sustainable project, and there's specific criteria here, and it's and we're limiting it to just as essentially a small area close to the train station. So we thought a special permit was an appropriate means of control, and
So is the special permit idea that the genesis of that was on your end, or the town board or town planner asked for it?
This was an approach by the applicant to create legislation to create a new special permit because their project did not meet any of the current zoning. So it was the applicant's proposal for a special permit.
Okay.
So I think Tom touched on this a little bit. There's sort of the process by which we are making these decisions, and that's worthy of a lot of questions, and certainly I think that it can be improved significantly. When it comes to the concept of what's being proposed ultimately, I absolutely love it, and am very, very supportive of the concepts, and I think the presentation, especially Andrew, was it? Was exceptional and very well prepared, and really helpful to understand both the concept and the ultimate proposal here. And most of my concerns and questions will be on how to make this successful for you, sure, but really for the town, because I would love to see more of this, and this is very much a new concept for the town of Newcastle. And I wanna make sure that any input that we have furthers the potential success of this project, because it has far-ranging implications for the rest of the town, beyond just this site. So I'm very excited to see where this goes and to be as helpful as we can to make sure it is successful. I know you have a ton of questions, Conan. I have a bunch of questions, but go ahead.
No, I was just gonna add that what I like about this, and I'm gonna start with what I like about this, is the fact that we are putting our foot forward with all the right sort of intentions for this site. I do agree with Eldad that we wanna see that we come out of this with codifiable ways to see how other things will be developed around it, so that's important to us. But the fact that the site is vacant, the where it is located, the idea that if we have any density in town, these are the sites that are going to get developed. So from all those perspectives, as a first pass, it's a really beautifully laid out concept. You've thought about things that matter to us as in this town, and so kudos, like I think that's a great first step. We will have a lot of conversations, and these are things that we are trying to hammer out. If we want, if we want an activated sidewalk, and if we want a walkable downtown, we're going to have to think about parking and the reduction of parking or no parking. And Tom's right that if we give away parking, so we will have to make a decision thinking about what is gonna get built eventually, and will there be enough parking for the guys who are gonna build later? Then we can always talk about how much parking can be reduced. So this is going to be a point of contention, but it's a step forward. It's very important to recognize that it's close to the train station. This is where it's possible, and everything that we're seeing right now, in terms of materials, in terms of conversations of how it'll get built, how quickly it'll get put together, all of that matters to us. And I think tying that to your overall conversation of being a carbon zero, carbon neutral proposal would help us. Is what I would start with.
So a couple of other thoughts. Just on the parking question, I think we have to talk about residential parking and commercial parking separately. We talk about the proximity to the train station. That is relevant from my perspective exclusively to the residential component, right? And I'm very eager to see all these studies because I would love for them all to be, based in solid research and definitive. Because I would love for this project to be successful with as little parking as possible. I just worry about the commercial piece of it, and the other part of the commercial piece that it is because of the shape of the lot and then the design of the open space, you have created sort of a unique shape to the commercial space. And so two questions about that. One, it's very specific, right? And so which may limit its potential success. And so I worry about that because what I don't want is this project to be built and just have a vacant ground floor, right? Because that's a failure from my perspective and will not sort of engender additional support for such projects. And so I wanna make sure that we're not designing something that really looks amazing and then ends up being not great. And then the other question I had was just about the retail space. You were talking about, I think, two spaces, right? Two separate uses. Is that codified in the language as far as or will it be a Rite Aid when it's done, occupying both spaces?
No, the site plan I think shows two commercial spaces.
Sure.
Let's just say commercial because it
Right.
could be retail or restaurant.
Restaurant, yep.
I think the idea will be retail in the northern space, which is smaller, and restaurant in the southern space. But whether the developer can get a restaurant tenant, I don't know.
Right.
You're right. There's a market component to that. So we're hoping to have flexibility to see what can be feasibly leased.
Yep.
So
we may have to look through when we're talking about the site plan, think through what the shape of the retail space is and the number of spaces.
Height, I don't
Yeah.
know if that matters. I think
so-
it's high enough that it doesn't matter.
So we designed the retail specifically, that it's at the section of the building that's closest to everything else in town.
Yes, which makes perfect sense.
We originally had 6,500 square feet. We actually brought it down to 4,200 square feet.
Right.
We were told that everybody in town wants a diner or a community restaurant, something that's open all day into the evening. So we designed the space to accommodate, it could be a restaurant, it could be retail. We do a lot of retail business, so we looked at it so it's forward facing towards the rest of town with an outdoor area. So it could be the maximum leasable space to fit into the community. And then the balance is a small sliver of retail. So we thought about the most storefront, high ceilings. That's why if you saw the renderings, you've really got a good 15-foot ceiling in there and be able to fit 3 floors above it. We spent a lot of time building out that retail space with something that'll work. With if you looked at one of the renderings, if you guys wanna go back to it, we can, it's got a garage door opening, so you can really open up that space.
The renderings are beautiful, I mean,
But that's how we designed the
Yeah.
retail, to make that space as attractive and community friendly as possible, so that it'll fit into the community and be used and attractive to an operator.
Do you own the site?
I am partners with the owner.
Right,
They
okay.
brought me in to develop it,
Great.
so. All I do is development all day, I sit in a lot of these meetings throughout the country, and our first goal is to see what everybody in town wants. And we are a diner, restaurant, and we geared that space towards that. And if we can deliver on that, we'd love to do so.
Can I ask some questions about the language? On page 1, under site requirements C, under variances, I don't know if this is just like a typo of sorts, but it says zoning board of appeals upon a showing of unnecessary hardship. The word unnecessary should be maybe undue hardship, or I don't know. Right? I mean, the hardship isn't unnecessary,
crazy.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, just wanna make sure that I'm not missing.
No, I think, yeah, I mean,
I
we
think the
don't,
language is intended to track the New York State town law provisions on variances, but we can double check that
Okay.
and make sure the correct language is used.
Okay, and then as far as dwelling units, this I understand is like sort of an imposition you're putting on yourself, sort of to give the town control, but you're limiting it to efficiency studios, 1 and 2 bedrooms. Why are we limiting it to that? And also, if this will apply to other sites, then that's a limitation that's gonna apply to those sites as well. I'm not crazy about that limitation, I mean, larger units can be interesting too, from my perspective. And then additionally, the limitation on square footage, right, you have it at between 500 and 2,000, goes with the limitation on the from my perspective, the bedroom count. I'm curious, is that something that was put on you or something that you want sort of to restrict yourselves for some reason? What is the thinking behind the unit limitation?
sure, well, one of the issues that we foresaw as being a potential point of controversy was whether there would be a lot of school children generated for the public school system in the town of Newcastle. And we designed the project with our unit mix and the typology of the project so that it would not generate that many school children. And we've our secret documents estimate what they would be, but if we had larger units that would be more family
I understand why you did that, but
it might generate more school children. We thought that would be less well received. I mean, from the applicant standpoint, having perfect, 100% flexibility would be fine, but we thought that might not be as well received by the town.
What are you seeing as the market requirement, like based on market studies, what is it that you're seeing would work? If we were to not talk about the town itself, like what is it that the market would support here?
Well, we think this is an economically viable project. I think Jeff would be in a better position than I am to talk about market conditions.
We could build a combination of 1, 2s, and 3s. We were looking at all of the response to the form-based code prior to us.
Sure.
And the response of larger units was one of the things, and the school system that came with a terrible response when we started this. We've been, just to give everybody a little bit of background, I've been doing this project, working on it for about a year. This is our first time in front of you, but I've been in front of the town board several times, we've been doing community outreach and meeting with the neighbors, so we've been working on this for quite some time. Vetting out where we thought kind of the pitfalls would be with the project.
What has the community outreach been like?
All of the neighbors around us, meeting with them of their concerns about our project height, open space.
That's a very small sliver of the community, right?
Of course. I understand completely. And let us give you some of our opinions of what we've been dealing with so far. We've been thrown as a yo-yo. This project is owned by the Feinberg family. Rite Aid is the current, or Walgreens is the tenant. They are still paying them rent. They will not be paying them rent forever. We've been going through this process for 1 year. There was a moratorium on their project, which was unconstitutional, and I'll say that now and continue to say it. We've been trying very hard to do this project and work with everybody in the town to get to a point where we can go somewhere with it. We understand the parking requirements that everybody has. We're trying to build a green project. Having to fulfill a parking requirement really doesn't make you a green project. So we're trying to find the right secret sauce that works for everybody. That's why the first thing I said is we walk into a town and ask, what does everybody want to make it work? And we're really trying to make everything work. And you pull, and that's what the special permit concept kind of was there. Put more affordable in. Let's go a little higher. Let's reduce the parking. Let's find what levers to push and pull that works for everybody to see if we can make this project work. If we can't make it work, we can't make it work. But hopefully, I think this would be a great project for the town. I think it's a dilapidated site right now. It's an eyesore, and I think mixed use there with affordable green project would be fantastic. And it would really put Newcastle at the forefront of putting something out there that would be fantastic. And be replicated up and down the Eastern Seaboard throughout the country. And hopefully we can do it. And hopefully with your help, we'll be able to do it.
Got it. That's helpful. Question just on the affordable housing provision here in the text. It just references a section of our zoning code, right? And you talked about 12%. Our code asks for 10%. So I understand that you have the additional 2% as this workforce housing, but is what's proposed in the special permit language not consistent with what you're actually proposing? It seems like a lesser limitation.
We're proposing more. Our site plan application will have
Right.
the 12%.
I like that you're
instead of
proposing
10%.
more, to be clear, I just wanna understand, why wouldn't then this special permit language say 12% if it's gonna apply potentially to another site?
We would have no objection to that, if
Right,
that's.
if you are proposing 12, because then you or the next owner could then build 10 if the limitation is 10, right?
So we're talking 5 units, right? 45, so we're talking 5 units, would that be right?
Early on, excuse me, I'd like to talk for a minute. Early on, you mentioned that the 12% was for affordable housing and workforce, which is a slightly higher category. Another thing that you noted was that this new building would cut down the noise for the buildings and people that live there and work there across the street. Now, I assume that you're gonna have some extra special installation to make sure that the noise doesn't affect the people that would take over space in the building you're talking about. We've done that on other projects, or at least one of the major projects. Also, the height of the building is such that the houses that are across the street, with their lower areas perhaps being, retail, you're gonna cut the amount of sun they get in the afternoon, which is perhaps not important to some, but I think it's important to everybody. And then the other thing is electrical cars, fine, if you can afford them, you can have the spaces. But I'm not a fan yet of the battery operated bicycles, because there's enough stories out there about lithium fires on the cars, not to mention, these other smaller features. So I would hope that there would be enough safety devices inside the parking area to be able to put out lithium fires. Other than that, very interesting project.
Right, let me just address the issue of the shadows that you mentioned in the afternoon. We're gonna have, we have a shadow study, we will be presenting that to the board in connection with our site plan application. So we will demonstrate what the shadows are, what times of day and the seasons and that type of thing. So we will respond to that comment.
How this is probably a question really for the developer. You know, in a perfect world, you've been pushed and pulled and tossed already. But what would your preference be in terms of the retail and commercial? It seems to me that things would be a whole lot more simple if this was completely residential. I've asked other developers that in the middle of the project, and of course, at that point, they turn me and scream at me, of course, I would like to do away with the commercial. And so-
No, I think there needs to be some accessory retail. I think, I mean, if you come down this side of town, anytime after dark, it's completely barren. You eat at Les Jardins, I mean, nobody parks in the back really anymore, you park up front. So I think if there was some activation, Susan Lawrence closes, I think, at what, 6, right? So there's really no activation. So I think if there's some activation, if it was a small cafe or something even, and not 4,000 square feet of a diner or something, I think something needs to activate and pull town down further would be great. And it's also, it's an amenity to residents as well. You
Okay,
can go downstairs, I think it
enough,
would
yep.
be beneficial. So maybe not 4,000, 25, something.
okay. I'm just concerned with it being a stumbling block for you on this parking issue and how we get through all that.
We did a parking study, so let's everybody review it.
Yeah.
It's very telling from, I joke about the parking in town all the time. My wife, my kids are in town multiple times a week. At lunchtime, it's busy in town. But I mean, from 4:30 on, there's a load of parking. So I think you'll notice when you review the parking study, it's interesting to read. There's certainly times that are tough, but still meet the requirements for whatever the parking studies are from the professionals. Not a parking professional, I'm like you, I wanna park 10 feet from where I'm going. I'm about the worst it comes, but I'm not gonna be the one renting. But when you read it, you'll see that parking requirements can be met for the town. And as you go further out from distance, there's a sea of parking, so.
So we don't
Which
need,
way, to the north or south?
What was it? I read that thing 3 times and it still was just too much for me.
so this is gonna be a long conversation, I think, and it should be, right? But it's more than the existing parking demand, it's future demand. That we as planners, the planning board, and I think the town board really need to be concerned about. And so the parking studies are gonna be very helpful. We have been arguing that the town board ought to be doing the parking ahead for a long time. We're saying you gotta figure out what's going on down here and what the current zoning, if you were to develop under current zoning and could develop under current zoning, what would be the parking demand for that? Now, it's a very complicated question because some sites you can't develop to current zoning because they're so constricted, right? So it gets to be something which is not such an easy answer, but you gotta try and find out what the answer is and then make some assumptions in order to protect the existing property owners who are not yet ready to develop. That's what speech I was making before. So the parking study is gonna be helpful to that, but that's not out of the equation. That needs to be put in the equation. I think that needs to be put in the equation. Somehow it's gotta be figured out.
And driving trends. I'm not one of them. I like cars, but people, it's car sharing isn't when we said car sharing, it's almost car rental, right? You're not getting in the car with somebody else. There's a dedicated cars inside the building that you take your phone and you can rent the car for 2 hours by yourself. It has become very popular and it stops people from having 2 cars and only having one.
Again, for the that
yeah.
addresses the residential
Yeah.
demand.
But it also addresses this whole demand, by the way, and residents can use them and you'll find they become very popular because it's almost like having a car rental on demand right there.
No, I understand. My my son lives in London, he used to do it all the time, finally bought a car because he could afford to do it, but he used to do it all the time.
Try finding a car these days. So, we've learned a lot about this over the last few years, in a lot of buildings we build, and it's become really beneficial to people. That, you know, you need to go to Home Depot and you have a small car, well, there's a pickup truck that you can rent for 2 hours to go to Home Depot. It's interesting.
Yeah, so,
Again, it's not you and it's not me.
No.
yeah,
Well, I think Tom makes a good point. The future and the proposition of what happens in the aggregate, and not a crazy, build out max, so no one will ever do anything. But a realistic study, I think that, I mean, what you've done, I'm sure is gonna be incredibly helpful. But we're gonna have to project over and above that.
And
I
also,
believe.
what happens with the parking lots? Do they stay one story? Do you build a parking deck for the train station? I mean,
Yeah, well, those,
boy, don't go there, that's,
Right.
you will never get this built.
That's right.
the one directly from across from us isn't even striped.
No,
And then they are empty, I mean, yes, so.
great.
So this is where I am on this right now. I still don't, somebody has to explain to me, don't have to, but it'd be nice if I could understand it better. What the real need is, and what the real, why would the town want to burden their zoning code with this special permit, new special permit section, which is specifically tailored to a particular developer who, they want to come in and develop, but why would they do that? Why is that necessary? I don't understand that. Because the ask that you've got, you're gonna have to go through a process anyway. If you wanna go to 4 stories, you'll have to go through a variance, right? The zoning board, I assume. Unless the town board decides to hold all of those variances to themselves, which they have the option.
Well, the
to do.
special permit would obviate the need to go to the
No, I know,
ZBA.
I understand that. I understand that.
Right.
But that doesn't reason why, that's not a sufficient reason to have a special permit.
100%.
That's my point.
100%.
And then, the parking is going to be something that I think you're going to try and, it seems as though you're loading into an opening within the special permit, parking strategies and conditions that allow you to build what you wanna build. What are your other asks here? There are like 4 in particular that I think I heard. Height, parking, room sizes. I don't think room size is a big deal. I think that if you guys got your handle on the market, that's great. I think that's your business, no problem. I think that's fine. It doesn't seem like there's really a lot, right? In terms of the content of the specific form of the proposal, that really warrants a special permit section, muddying up the code the way I see it, with language for this special section for the special permit for this special site. The one thing that you didn't talk about, I don't think sufficiently so that I could understand it, is a little bit more of the process of how you intend to get there and what the special permit provision says about that. And to me, there's this, the very end, the very last sentence, I think it is. It talks about the relationship between the town's authority and the planning board's authority. And it says, it's fairly clever, but it's pretty transparent. It says, site development plan approval by planning board, town board's approval of a special permit shall be deemed to authorize the planning board to render a determination with respect to site development plan approval, great, pursuant to 440, as applicable, except for compliance with everything in here, which the town board has authority on. So what it essentially does, I'm not a lawyer, but if I read it right, it's saying that the planning board really has, in the end, no site plan approval with respect to the conditions, the provisions within this special permit language. So
That's absolutely correct.
right, so why are you guys proposing that? Why are you
Well-
taking the planning board, it's not about you and me, it's not about these guys or me, it's about the function of a planning board in a municipality. Why are you taking the planning board out of the equation?
Well, the planning board would still have site plan approval authority,
But
but
not-
not with respect to the criteria set forth in the special
But this is the
permit.
whole
And
development.
under the town law, town boards can issue special permits, or they can delegate that authority to planning boards. The town law,
Well, I know that. I mean, I know that, but
it could be done either way.
my question, I'm sorry, I know it can be done other way. I wanna know, I'm asking why you are proposing it.
Well, we proposed this structure with the special permit because in order to build our project, we're gonna need an amendment to the zoning code. We can't just come in and say we want a variance to build something
Sure you
that's.
can. It happens all the time.
Well, I think it would be very difficult to do.
I don't know, would it?
I thought it would be more appropriate to have the policymaking body of the town, which ultimately is the town board, the elected representatives of the residents, make the policy decision whether they want to approve a project of this nature. And
Okay.
I don't think it's respectfully really like a zoning board of appeals type issue. This is a policy issue, and whether the town wants to have this type of development in this area of the Chappaqua Hamlet. And if the town board favors that, which we think they do, but obviously I don't, they referred this to the planning board, so that indicates some level of support. Obviously, they still have to review our comments and get public hearings, and there's a whole, it's by no means decided. It's just we've got an initial positive feedback, otherwise we would just drop the proposal and not invest further money in this process. We thought it was appropriate that the town board make the basic policy decision, and I still think that.
I'm not suggesting they're not making a policy decision. I mean, the zoning is a policy decision, but the execution of the policy that you are asking them to put in place is essentially the exact physical description of your development. And it seems to me that, unless I'm mistaken, there is little leeway for an actual site plan review, and maybe I'm wrong about this, within the special permit authorities that you have set up, special site plan review by the planning board. And so I'm just wondering why. It must have been, it must have been a conscious thought, because it's here. I mean, it's done, or it's proposed to be done. I have no idea what the town board thinks about this. We haven't talked with them about this yet. But I'm just curious about this. I don't know why it's good for the town. It might be good for you. I can see why it might be good for you, but I'm just trying to understand why it would be good for the town, and if you have an idea why that would be so.
Tom, can I just mention one thing?
Yes, please.
Under the current process for special permits, the planning board does not have site plan approval authority. The only thing that the planning board has jurisdiction over the current special permit process, and that is of course when the zoning board is the approval authority for the special permit, is environmental permits. So here, there's actually a modification from the current process that would otherwise be applicable under the current code for special permits, which gives the planning board more authority than they would otherwise have. Because if it was just a straight special permit under our current procedures, the town board would do both the special permit and the site plan, and you would be left with just stormwater. So I don't think there's any steep slopes or wetlands or any tree removal or anything else environmental related for this project.
So I told you.
So I just want to put that out there as a different perspective.
Yeah.
That the structure actually gives the planning board more authority than it otherwise would under our current special permit procedures.
So that's incredibly helpful, Jennifer, but it makes me think of two separate questions. One is, it still doesn't change the fact that were you to propose this development without a special permit, you would still need the site plan approval that would come to us, right?
Correct.
And two, if the draft as written is approved tomorrow, as written, Alessio.
Thank you.
What role does the planning board have? Because what Tom is saying is that there's a role in name only, the way he's interpreting this. But I'm curious, and what then Jennifer's point is that under normal special permits, you wouldn't come before us for site plan approval, or an applicant wouldn't come before us for site plan approval at all. But here you are coming before us under the language as written, but so long as you meet the requirements of the special permit, we don't really get a say. Is that fair to say? Is that how the language, because all we'd have to do is sort of stamp, yes, you're in compliance with the requirements of the special permit, or no, you're not in compliance, but that would already have been determined, and then we wouldn't really have any input. Is that how this would play out in the real world, were this to be approved as written?
No, I don't think that's the intent, and I know that that's not the intent. And I don't think that that's necessarily how it would play out. I think what was also envisioned was that the special permit and the site plan process would really be sort of a concurrent process, which speaks to the joint public hearing that's written into the procedures as well, so that the town board and the planning board would really review the special permit and the site plan application in lockstep, so that your comments can be heard by the town board's comments can be heard by you, and so forth. So really to be more of a joint effort than two boards standing alone in their own silos.
So I don't mind joint meetings, but it still sort of leaves open the question as to who votes and what is determinative from those votes.
So look, there are specific criteria set forth in a special permit, and our project proposal documents would have to satisfy those criteria. But there would be other issues about the driveway, about the internal circulation within the parking area, the street plantings, all the issues that you deal with in site plan, signage, I mean, there'd be various issues that would be
Got it. Okay, so
outside of the
traditional
special
site plan
permit.
approval absent the specific requirements of the special permit.
Absolutely.
So let me,
Right, that's correct.
let me see if I could take that a little further. First of all, thank you, Jennifer, for helping out on that. So this is language, and then there's a drawing, right? And the specifics of the language, if this gets adopted, need to be honored as much as possible, right, by the town board, by the applicant, and by the planning board in support of the whole process. But this does not necessarily lock in the design of the project. For instance, maybe we don't like the courtyards, maybe the town doesn't like the courtyards the way they're done. Maybe they don't like the shape of the building, maybe they would prefer a different architectural style of the facade. All of those things are left in play, is that correct? By this
Yes,
language.
the courtyards are a little bit required in a sense that there are standards for avoiding a wall up to a certain height on the street. We have to have setbacks, but the exact configuration
And
that
location.
we've proposed, maybe if the town doesn't like it, it won't approve the project.
So there's,
Yeah.
got it, so there's an opportunity to shape the project from a design point of view in the process.
If the planning board has specific, yes, I mean, it's like any other project.
Okay. Good to know.
So the primary use of a special permit in this case is because it is speeding up the process because different boards will be working with you. Plus, there's a bunch of different variances that would be needed to make the site work, and so we are creating a special permit. That's what we're saying,
I think-
right? Okay.
No, because I think the special permit, just generally speaking, special permits are generally for uses that it's intended to be more protective for the town. Obviously, special permits are permitted use under codes, subject to certain standards, subject to meeting certain standards. So when you have a use that you don't want to just let loose as a principally permitted use, and you wanna retain a little bit more control over that particular use, typically a special permit is the mechanism to do so. It gives the approval authority the discretion to look at the application materials and determine, are they meeting these controls that we've set forth in the code to make sure that we're getting the product and the use that is intended. So I don't think it necessarily has to do with whether variances would be required or not, because that could be handled in a different way. That could be handled in a way that, you modify the BRP zoning district to allow up to 4 stories and to allow a different parking requirement, but that's gonna apply to all the properties in the BRP and in the BRP district. So there are other ways to go about it, but the special permit process is more protective for the town, allows more control for the town.
So that control is exercised in the creation of the special permit and the definitions that go into it, essentially the text of this draft. And if it gets approved, for example, in this form, it essentially becomes as of right with respect to the developers. Yes or no?
As long, but they have to meet to a T each of the standards set forth in the code, yeah. But once they meet those standards, then yes, there's not as much discretion for whether to approve the project or not. The discretion lies in determining whether the application materials have met those standards.
So one way to look at it is the more control, the more definition there is to the language in here, the more security the town might have in the outcome.
Right, and obviously in setting the standards, the town board has ultimate legislative discretion.
Standards is a loose term. What is, I mean, at least the way I'm interpreting it, like, are there, do the standards meet specific criteria? Like
the standards, as I'm referring to them, are the things set forth in the proposed local law. So for example, the parking requirements, the dwelling unit styles, the basic meat of that local law that's in front of you.
Right, so just as a matter of just information, would it be, on the other hand, to the town's advantage to have the language less specific so that there is more, as the process goes through, there's more opportunity for the town to shape the project?
In a certain regard, yes. Sometimes that tool to have more discretionary language is useful, yes.
Thank you.
I would say that, ultimately, when we look at this project and the legislation, ultimately, there are two things here going on. We have a lot of cover over these two things, but the two things are a request for an additional floor of height and a waiver of our standard parking requirements. That's all this is really about. All this other stuff about buildings and how it looks and this kind of stuff is kind of like it's cover for what's really going on. And to Tom's point, to the extent that we make it very specific for this project, we make it perhaps more of a burden for someone else, the other lot in this one area. So I think it ultimately the bottom line is it's going to be the policy that the town wants to take in terms of the extra floor and figuring out this parking. All this other stuff, I mean, these are things that are great. They're fantastic. Great designs, wonderful designs. Very interesting. I think it's fantastic, but it's cover. Right. For what's really going on here. And this is all a request to fit this in economically so it works, which we hope it does, in a way that I need to have 4 floors and you guys gotta figure out a way, we gotta figure out a way to make the parking work, to do what we wanna do here. So that's what this is all about. I mean, this is, and that's really the policy here.
I have never, it's not been demonstrated that they need 4 floors to make this work. I mean, then there's no demonstration. I'm not saying that you necessarily have to demonstrate it.
I'm just saying that's what's going on, I think, which is fine.
No, it's, I
absolutely wanna hear about it. I think it's
worked with, yes, you wanna hear about it, definitely. You need to know, I think the town board needs to know about it to make the determination about the 4 floors, because it's a big deal, right? It's a very big deal. But I have never not never, but it's very rare to meet somebody making an investment in a piece of property and not do everything they can to get the maximum return on it. That's how you do investments everywhere in life, at least financial investments everywhere in life. So it's not surprising that 4 stories is on the table, I would probably want to do the same thing. And so I don't think that it's a given that 4 stories is economically necessary, because there are 3-story projects going up all over around us, residential projects going on, being built right now, and having just been completed, that are going on in towns around us everywhere. Probably because they don't allow 4 stories. I'm not in on the details of all those developments in all those towns, but it's not a given that in this marketplace that you have to have 4 stories to make it go.
But
I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, and I mean, frankly, I hope we don't get into that argument of is 4 stories necessary to it's just, with the town board, I prefer not to get into that discussion because I think that's just ends up with us circling the drain a little bit. But Bob, your point that the 2 big asks here are an increase in height and a reduction in parking, I think is exactly right. That's what I was trying to get at. Like, what is being asked of us?
Right.
And is this the right mechanism to do that? I think we have already raised a bunch of legitimate questions that this may or may not be the right mechanism, or at least the right forum for it. I'm eager to have the conversation with the town board. It's getting late. So I just wanna repeat again how much I love the proposal, and I want it to be successful. And so there will be obviously lots of conversations. You have done your homework. I understand why you've made a lot of the choices that you've made, especially if you've done the homework on the the form-based code conversation that has happened in this town over the last couple years. So I get it, the impact on the or as little impact as possible on the school system and all that. But eager to see where this goes.
Okay.
Great.
Well, thanks for your attention.
Yep, thank you for the presentation.
Thank
Thank you
Appreciate it.
very much.
Yep, thank you.
Have a great holidays, everybody.
Thank you. Yep. Okay, we have an agenda item where we have discussion ourselves. Does anyone want to further discuss the legislation? Because that was a separate item on the agenda. It was kind of blended. If not, it's fine with me.
That's all right, yeah.
So what's our next step
Yeah,
with that?
right, what's next?
Well, the next step is the town board will be looking for some sort of input from us, and it's supposed to be delivered by January 15. That's the cutoff date. I would propose that we look at this and discuss it at our next meeting, which will be the first meeting in January, and look at the legislation. We've seen a fantastic presentation here, but I think we really have to delve into the legislation and the policy behind the legislation. More than that, the policy of the legislation as an approach.
It's 2 separate questions.
It really is. I mean, from my own personal standpoint, I hope the parking and I hope the height and the 2 big asks, I hope it works. And I think it would be a really great project. I'm really cautious about this commercial retail and diner stuff, but we'll see what the parking study shows.
Well, if we're already at the point of weighing in on whether we like the project or not, it seems to me it's premature because I mean, there's not, from my perspective, there hasn't been enough back and forth to really get into it because they're just Eldad loves it. Eldad loves it, and that's great, but what I just said to him was, well, I don't hate it. So
That's an inside joke, sorry.
That is an inside joke.
Not a very good one, but
it's all we got.
I like your idea that, it doesn't have to be, 4 stories, particularly if a smaller project minimizes the potential parking issues. So that's my 2 cents. I have to go, unfortunately.
Okay.
I have some things that I must do before everybody goes to bed here.
So just
Dick, happy holiday.
So just real quickly, just so you know where I'm coming from. I clearly think there's a problem with the legislation, but with respect to the design, I think parking is a big problem. I think 4 stories really needs to be looked at. I don't think that's a slam dunk for the town. I understand the architecture, I understand the style, construction, technology I think is fabulous, I love it. I think it's, we need more of that, and that's a big plus, I believe. I am, however, concerned about the massing of the project on the street. I'm concerned about the presentation of the size of this project on North King, the way it presents itself as a project. It presents itself as a project to me, less as sort of a Hamlet Street environment. And those are the kinds of things that are tough to get over, given where you are right now, and maybe they don't need to be to get over, but from my perspective, there's a lot of work to do, and we're ready to do it with you. And I think we'll get something out of it, I'm sure, because we all want something to happen there. And you guys seem to be, the right team members to do it, so I think it'd be great.
You don't have to, I mean, but if you.
I'd like to definitely read the parking study. I definitely wanna see the studies that you guys have put together. At the end of the day, this is a discussion we've been having forever. If we're looking at a certain amount of density, we are going to see some bulk there, and we're gonna have to think about it. I thought it was architecturally, it is pretty it is sensitively done. I could not have, I'm sure we could have figured out different designs on that lot, but I like what I saw as far as that is concerned. All of the vehicle of the policy making is important to us, and that is all something we would need to get behind for sure, and we would have continued discussions, because we don't wanna set a precedent that's going to then impact multiple other things. But it's good to understand where you're coming from in making the site work as well, because we all care about that, so.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much.
Sorry to keep you having the car running, but.
Good night.
Just to I love the concept. I'm not ready to vote yes on anything, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, because I think, to Tom's point, I don't think it's just a matter of taste, but I think, the 4th story and the extra amount of people, if you're gonna keep the commercial, maybe that's, something has to be sacrificed to make something more reasonable to parking. Although I agree with you, Al, that to me, the 1.3 to 1 is not that big of a lift on residential. To me, the real concern is commercial.
And even, it's like, we don't have to get into the parking discussion.
Right.
I'll leave it.
But I was gonna say, at the end of the day, if you want people there, and that's what we were saying, right? You want people to walk into the street, you want that street to be lively and activated. It has an impact, what you put in there is going to have impact.
If you don't have parking, you won't have people.
I hear your point completely,
Right.
Tom.
So I'm less
Yeah.
concerned about the negative impact of insufficient parking on the residential, because if the units are vacant, so be it, the residential units. I'm more concerned about the negative impact of insufficient parking on the commercial, because then we have a dead street and a failed project from the town's perspective.
Yep.
So that's where I wanna make sure we get it right, but conceptually, this is all the things that we have talked about that certainly get me excited about where the future of this town can be. But we will have those discussions, and I'm eager to have them with the town board also. The makeup of the board has shifted
Keeps changing.
a little bit since last we engaged with them, and so and it will continue to change, I think, right? This is gonna take several conversations and time, and I think one of you said that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Great. All right, is there a motion to close the meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
You closed the whole meeting?
The whole
Yeah,
meeting.
why?
Aye.
Can I just say like 3 minutes of
Sure.
why I came here? Thank
Sure.
you, thank you
We
very
need to
much.
open meeting.
I don't
Well, we never voted on it. We didn't vote on it.
We haven't voted.
Okay.
It's okay.
Okay,
All right,
I
Nick, you're good.
don't wanna break any rules. So first of all,
Please
happy
state your name.
My name's Tom Kalish, I live at 48 Overlook Road. I came here in the early summer, I promise this will be brief. A neighbor situation, there was a lot of filming and photo shoots, and you guys were talking about changing whatever the law, the rule was about photo shoots, because these are major photo shoots, not small photo shoots. And I was not here, I was traveling in October and November, and you told me that you would be
Is that the town board?
It's not us.
Am I at the wrong place?
Not this board.
I'm sorry, isn't it the third Tuesday of the month right now?
It is anticipated.
You're telling me I sat through that
Sorry.
thing for
Oh,
2
I'm
hours
so
to find
sorry.
out who the Roy Place?
Yes, you did.
Then it truly is a wonderful Christmas. Happy holidays.
You know,
So what,
you saw the looks on our
when
faces,
when
like-
is the,
We have not been in any photo shoots.
what do
The
you think?
town board typically meets on every Tuesday night, but because
So
of the
many.
holiday, they did not meet this Tuesday.
You mean every Tuesday of the month?
Every other.
But they, yeah, every other. And so their first meeting is January sixth, I think, or January third.
I have the date. I wanna thank you all for giving me the minutes to embarrass myself.
I'm so sorry.
We can strike it from the
Good
minutes.
ideas tonight. And I like this project. I know a lot about sustainability. I like the project.
Okay.
But it ain't gonna look good in
Holidays.
Thanks, happy holidays.
town. Happy holidays, everybody.
We have a vote now on the motion.
We're only here because we have to be.
I actually learned a little bit tonight, so it wasn't for naught.
So Kanan made the motion, Eldad made the second. All in
Second.
favor?
Aye.
Yes, aye.
All right, everyone have a happy, wonderful, peaceful, and healthy holiday.
Thank you, you too,
Okay.
you too.
Bye-bye.
Merry Christmas.